I'm Andy Agathangelo. I'm the founder of the Transparency Task Force. We are a very, very unusual organization, in my opinion. We are a collaborative campaigning community that is dedicated to driving up the levels of transparency, truthfulness, and trustworthiness in the financial services sector. We're doing this at great expense and sacrifice to ourselves, to be very blunt about it, because we really believe in what we are doing. We are on a mission. Our mission is to promote ongoing reform of the financial sector so that it serves society better. And we're doing that because it really matters. The financial industry, without any doubt whatsoever, has the potential to be a wonderful servant to society, but it's not currently, and we want to change that. We want the financial services industry to properly serve society. At the moment, far, far, far too many people are being shortchanged by it in one way or another. At one end of the spectrum, there are relatively minor issues such as asset managers not disclosing all the fees clearly and properly. At the other end of the extreme, there are people contemplating suicide because they've been ruined by, for example, a bank. And none of this is acceptable. All of it needs to change. It's only going to change if enough of us find ways to work collaboratively to make the change happen. And a great big step forward in making the change happen is when we're able to share evidence about what's going on. So the Transparency Task Force style is very much about sharing evidence about what's going on. And that's what we're all about. We really do believe passionately, with a huge amount of energy and enthusiasm, that sunlight is the best disinfectant. And every single one of our events is designed to be another ray of sunlight lighting up the shadows, showing people what's really going on. And we believe that this cause is both noble and frankly necessary as well. Ladies and gentlemen, you all know the topic of tonight. The topic of tonight is RBS and NatWest, the scandal and why it matters, and it really does matter. I'm going to spend a few minutes sharing something with you that I think is very important. So I'm going to share my screen. Here we go. And I'm going to talk to you about something called Violation Tracker. I'm very, very aware that some of you, the fans of TTF amongst you, so to speak, are pretty familiar with Violation Tracker, and I don't feel embarrassed bringing you all right up to speed, because Violation Tracker is going to be a wonderful ally to everybody, you and me, that want to help improve the way the financial sector works. And I'm going to be spending a few moments explaining precisely why, and precisely in the context of RBS Group. Let me share with you what I'm thinking. So this is the Violation Tracker website. It is a wonderful website. I'll put a link to this webpage in the chat in a short while. I could spend literally hours telling everybody all there is to know about Violation Tracker. I'm not going to do that. What I am going to do is cut straight to the chase. And by cutting straight to the chase, this is what I mean. In here, where it says parent companies, I hope you can see this, where it says parent companies, you can put in Royal Bank of Scotland, and here it comes up, Royal Bank of Scotland. And as you've just seen in front of your very eyes, within a second, we get some information. And ladies and gentlemen, it's rather interesting information, because what it's telling us is this. It's telling us that Royal Bank of Scotland, by the way, this data is all since the year 2000. So it's since the year 2000. Royal Bank of Scotland has been fined that much, 13 billion, not million, $13 billion, 473,904. Sorry, I can't even get it right. 13,473,904,000. That's such a massive amount. It's practically inconceivable. This is one bank's violations, one bank's rule breaking. And by the way, this is what we know about. This doesn't include anything that might have been settled on the steps on the way into the court, for example. It doesn't include anything that didn't get to court at all. This is just what they actually got done for. 13 plus billion dollars worth of fines. And by the way, this is just against the US agencies. This isn't against the UK courts or UK agencies or regulators. This is just against the United States agencies. And it gives us some further details here. Toxic security abuses, 11 plus billion. Interest rate benchmark manipulation, $850 million worth of fines. Foreign exchange market manipulation, $395 million of fines. Banking violations, the actual banking rules and regs themselves, $324 million in fines. And tax violations, $106 million worth. Abuse is so bad it resulted in $106 million. And not only that, ladies and gentlemen, not only can we provide you with the headlines, we can give you the detail. Look at all this. It's in size order. So the top one, Royal Bank of Scotland for toxic security abuses in 2017 by the FHFA, whatever agency that is in the US, $5.5 billion. In 2018, $4.9 billion for more toxic securities abuses. So whatever they learned in 2017, I guess they forgot it by 2018. More toxic security abuses, $500 million worth of fines. 2015, DOJ criminal, that's the Department of Justice. Foreign exchange market manipulation. This is supposedly one of the UK's leading financial institutions. Please think of this, ladies and gentlemen, when you see the next advert on the TV about RBS. And of course, RBS isn't the only one. The data actually tells us, as clearly as you want to see it, that this is an endemic issue right across the banking sector, not just in the UK, but frankly around the world. And what we believe this data tells us, ladies and gentlemen, is that there is recidivism within the financial services and banking sector. What we mean by recidivism is organizations getting caught doing the same things over and over again. This must bring to the surface two profoundly important questions. One, how much confidence can we have in our regulatory framework if the bad company's conduct is caught, fined by the regulators? Who pays the fines? The shareholders of the organizations. Who are those shareholders? We are, through our pension funds, etc., etc. And they carry on doing it. This is the pattern that we are seeing time and time again. And the reason why, one of the many reasons why the RBS scandal really does matter, is because it's one of so many scandals of the same flavor, the same issues, conflicts of interest, data manipulation, customer violations. The list is endless. We're not making this stuff. This is real data that really does exist. Now, those of you that know the Transparency Task Force well will be aware that we have succeeded working with the people at Violation Tracker in Washington, DC, to bring Violation Tracker to the UK. It's a massive achievement. I'm not being big-headed here, but we're a teeny tiny, puny, insignificant grain of sand on the beach of the financial industry, and we are helping to bring Violation Tracker to the UK. It's like bringing a great big torch to our country to help us light up what's been going on in the shadows. I hope that sets a scene, ladies and gentlemen. Now, let me tell you what the challenges are going to be tonight. The challenges are going to be that we are pretty short of time. We're cramming in loads and loads of really good stuff. I must please ask our speakers, all of them, every single one of them, to stick to schedule as best as you possibly can. I will be tough, I will be strict, not because I like doing it, but because I need to make sure that we get through all of our speakers by the time we get to 8 p.m. UK time. But after 8 p.m., I will keep the channel open so that we can all carry on chatting if we want to. I think a lot of people are going to have a lot to say. And bearing in mind, we currently have 80 people on this call, there's a lot of opinion here that needs to be shared. So I'm going to stop it there. We will be following up with all sorts of information in the meantime. Please brace yourselves for what you're about to hear. I hope I've set the scene nicely, but I can tell you this, you're going to be hearing some pretty shocking stuff. Some of it you may have heard before. I'm pretty sure some of it will be brand new to you. Can I please invite you to put your hands together, ladies and gentlemen, for Steve Middleton, who's going to be kicking us off first of all. Steve Middleton, over to you. Thank you very much indeed. Thank you, Steve. Steve.
Thanks, Andy. Yeah, background is financial services, ex-banking, ex-financial advisor. I had problems with RBS and Barclays myself a few years ago when I was doing some development works and struggled to get funding. It was around the time of the credit crunch, obviously, and realised that banks could very quickly turn on you when things went badly. And from then on, I've got very involved in taking forward negotiations, mediations on behalf of myself and other people to try and solve issues and fallouts with the bank. So thanks very much, Alexander. So this is the first screen. What we're talking about very briefly here is RBS Global Restructuring Group and the Asset Protection Scheme. Was it high street banking or was it highway robbery? If we can move on to the second slide, please, Alexandra. Okay, so what did GRG control? Most people believe that GRG controlled 16,000 businesses and are roughly around 65 billion of the assets at RBS. However, when you look at the high-level controls document, you will find that GRG were involved everywhere within the bank. They actively managed the problems with clients, they managed relationships with clients, they managed the credit functions. They operated through these 6 various units: corporate restructuring, business restructuring, recoveries, real estate restructuring, strategic investment group, and West Register. Effectively, if you were not a core business within RBS, you were in a restructuring area, not necessarily global restructuring, but in a restructuring area. Can we move on to the next slide, please, Alexandra? So you will see here that the head of GRG and the COO are involved in virtually every committee within the group. They're in the executive committee, they're in the risk committees, provisions, audit, they're on the asset protection senior oversight committee, and they're also involved in Holland and Ulster Bank in Ireland. So effectively, restructuring or GRG, whichever you wish to call them, were involved in all of the non-core areas of the bank. So again, if we can move on to the next slide, please, Alexandra. So what was the Asset Protection Scheme? Well, the Asset Protection Scheme was, in theory, an insurance put in place, the government will say, to underwrite losses at RBS to support the bank's solvency and liquidity. What actually was put forward was a portfolio of 340 billion of RBS loans. 200 billion of those loans were associated with commercial lending and hedges or swaps associated with those loans. What would happen is RBS, in theory, would take the first 20% of any losses on that portfolio, which was effectively 60 billion. And then if there were losses on the sale of assets, RBS would then suffer the next 10% of those losses. The government, through the Asset Protection Scheme, would underwrite the remaining 90%. So this was promoted as something that would help RBS and help liquidity. What it actually became was a rapid disposal of non-core lending, is what it led to. In other words, the bank used this system, this asset protection scheme, as a way to get rid of existing customers, existing lending they did not want on their books anymore. It also was used for aggressive acquisition of customers' assets through West Register and through other connections. It became a basic stop loss for RBS customer culling. So what was set up in theory to be positive, that was supposed to work alongside additional lending that was supposed to come out to SMEs, actually became this slaughterhouse, this abattoir MPs have mentioned, and it wasn't 16,000, that went into this, substantially more, as you will see. So if we look at the next slide, please, Alexandra. So who was in control of this? Well, you hear of different people when it comes to GRG. Derek Sachs, Chris Sullivan, two of the well-known ones. Nathan Bostock and Rory Cullinan were actually in control of this whole area. So they controlled all of the non-core assets at RBS in the RBS group and all of the asset protection scheme assets. So Nathan Bostock, what do we know about him? Well, he was the most senior executive looking after GRG. Vince Cable said that management at the bank knew or should have known that there was a coordinated strategy in the bank for mistreatment of customers, and that the head of the GRG responsible for that was Mr. Nathan Bostock. Clive Lewis, when he spoke about what happened within RBS, and he was talking GRG or restructuring, said that the costs was in the tens of billions what happened. So he said, let's be clear, if it's this big, it may be the largest theft anywhere ever. Chris Sullivan and Derek Sack, when they gave evidence to the Treasury Select Committee, suggested that what happened in restructuring was not about profit. They denied that claim 27 times in a TSC meeting, but a few weeks later were forced to admit that what they had said was not true. It was a profit centre. The culture within GRG, one of the well-known sayings that staff were told, sometimes you need to let customers hang themselves. Now, Rory Cullinan actually came back, he worked under Fred Goodwin, he came back to manage this non-core area to work down these debts, and we'll cover a bit more about that later on in Mark's section. HuffPost described Cullinan's position as running the world's worst bank from a fifth floor office overlooking Liverpool Street. Cullinan was said to be savouring a new feeling in his life as a toxic asset disposal specialist. What they're not telling you is those toxic assets were my companies, your companies. If you're in RBS, if you're in real estate, if you're in development, you're in property, you were part of those toxic assets he was talking about, he intended to run down. He eventually fell foul of or fell out with RBS when he was found sending Instagram selfies to his daughter in board meetings, telling her how boring it was while he was discussing the shedding of 14,000 jobs within those sectors. Those are the two gentlemen who were running this whole restructuring area. So if we can move on to the next slide, please. So what was the difference between in GRG or the asset protection scheme? Well, if you were in GRG, you effectively lost control of your company. They wouldn't let you sell assets without their approval. They wouldn't let you restructure without their approval. They wouldn't let you have new credit facilities. There was hardly any additional lending available to you. And there was always pressure for RBS to take an equity stake or ownership in your business. You would charge fees in theory for the excellent management or expertise of the GRG managers. Effectively, you were shadow directed. If you went into the asset protection scheme, again, this was controlled by Bostock under restructuring and the asset protection rules, you ended up in the same position. You couldn't sell or transfer assets that were part of the scheme. You couldn't sell your rights or transfer your rights. There was a negative pledge involved. You couldn't refinance the debt without the Asset Protection Agency's approval, or HM Treasury as it was behind them. If you wanted to restructure and roll over existing debt, again, you couldn't do it without HM Treasury's approval. You were not made aware if your debt was involved in the asset protection scheme. They wouldn't tell you. They couldn't tell you. They weren't allowed to. So effectively, whether you're in GRG or the asset protection scheme, you were being shadow directed. You had lost control of your company. You just didn't realise it, and you were not being told that. Shadow directing, according to the Companies Act 2006, says it defines a shadow director as a person in accordance with whose directions or instructions the directors of the company are accustomed to act. Well, this is exactly what happened here. You couldn't move, you couldn't sell, you couldn't do anything. You couldn't control your creditor's position without the approval of your bank manager or the asset protection agency behind them, or GRG. So move on to slide 7, please, Alexandra. So how many people were in restructuring? 16,000? No, there were 2.9 million individual borrowers in the asset protection scheme. 586 corporate groups. You lost control of your business, you were at risk of being asset stripped, and you were at risk of going into administration. All non-core and GRG assets were in the asset protection scheme. Everything in development, everything in building, everything in leisure, everything in property, everything in real estate were in the asset protection scheme. As I said, this was a 340 billion collateralised debt obligation, an investment scheme, insurance scheme built by the government that in theory was to support the bank, but in reality became a killing ground for SMEs. So why couldn't you know if you were in it or not? Well, interestingly enough, in parliamentary questions, Martin Whitfield in February 19 asked the Chancellor if he would publish which focused assets covered under the Asset Protection Agency were in there. So in other words, which assets were in the scheme, who was in the scheme, who was in that asset protection insured area. And he also asked which assets within that area had been transferred to West Register. So that was RBS's own property arm. Very good questions. What was he told by John Glenn? The details of those assets is commercially sensitive. When he was asked about what went to register, it's commercially sensitive information. So if you were in the asset protection scheme, if you were pushed into administration, if you lost your business because you had lost control of that business but weren't aware of it, you're not allowed to know whether you were in there or not. Can we move on to the next screen, please? Well, why weren't you allowed to know? Because I will suggest and firmly believe, based upon the evidence I've seen, that it was an area where you could be bussed for the bank's benefit. Now, this is a couple of examples I'm going to put up. I won't go through them in too much detail, you can look at them afterwards, but this is an example of somebody with 8 million property assets and £500,000 cash, £4 million debt. They're put into the asset protection scheme. So what the bank has to do, RBS has to agree to a haircut of 20% on the debt. Well, that takes them down to 3.2 million. In theory, you've still got 8 million of assets and 500,000 of cash. But what happens, has always happened here, is the bank would come in, there'd be a low valuation done on the properties and there'd be a fire sale. So in the situation, we've got a fire sale of £8 million of the properties being sold for £3 million. Okay? So the RBS were allowed to turn to the asset protection scheme and claim on an insurance, and it would be the difference between their original haircut value and what they lost on the sale. So that would be 200,000 here. So they could recover £180,000 from the asset protection scheme if they claimed on it, £3 million they got on the sale of the properties, and they could recover the £500,000 cash. So the bank will say, well, fair enough, the customer may have lost everything, but we also lost money on the deal. If we can move on to the next slide, please, Alexandra. This is more complicated. I will talk through it reasonably quickly. Have a look at it yourselves later. If, however, you went to that same customer and you sold them an interest rate swap before they went into the asset protection scheme, so there was a further additional £1 million credit liability that they didn't know about, and you also put a personal guarantee on that person for their assets and the liabilities, which was a very common occurrence before people went into GRG or restructuring, you could go through the same scenario where you then fire sell the properties for £3 million, but what you can actually recover, you can recover the difference between your losses from the haircut amount, which is the derivative credit line of £1 million, the £3 million debt, so you've actually got £4 million into the scheme. You can recover 900,000 of that under the insurance, but because the customer, without realising that or knowing about the insurance, is actually covering all the remainder with their guarantees and cash, you can also go back to them for the guarantee and for the cash. So prior to selling the swap, this person could have gone into the asset protection scheme, been sold a swap, been asked to take out a personal guarantee, that had 4 million of debt, the bank can recover 5.4 million from busting them. We go on to the next one, please, Alexandra. So the taxpayers bailed out RBS. Why didn't they get a haircut offer? Well, if you're going to take a haircut of 20% to go into the asset protection scheme, why wouldn't you just offer the customers a 20% haircut to refinance? Effectively, because you were in a meat grinder, there was more money to be made by them busting you with these other facilities they could put in place. But again, why wouldn't the Treasury or RBS offer the haircut 20%, 30% debt forgiveness? Because there was more money in busting customers than there was in allowing them to repay the debt. The final screen, please, Alexandra. Was it a legitimate solution? RBS own group accounts in 2009 say In order to fulfil its disclosure obligations under the Asset Protection Scheme, the group may incur the risk of civil suits, criminal liability, or regulatory actions. In other words, they were disclosing confidential information that would breach contracts and the Data Protection Act to comply with the Asset Protection Scheme without telling their customers.
Jesus Christ.
Sir Nicholas McPherson, Senior Civil Servant, Permanent Secretary to the Treasury, said, some of the assets on which the Asset Protection Scheme will pay out may not well fulfil the standard requirements for commitment and payment of public funds. These include acting within the law, not tolerating fraud, illegality or corruption, and operating controls to ensure those things. So they couldn't sign off the fact that we're not putting corrupt and criminal assets into the scheme to be insured. Vince Cable said, it's simply a massive fraud on the taxpayer. The National Audit Office would not sign off the Treasury's accounts for only the second time in their 350-year history because they couldn't accept that Parliament had agreed to allow these assets to be insured at Lloyd's and the Royal Bank of Scotland. Ian Fraser, who will be speaking later on, said, it's long been known that the government's Asset Protection Agency, the body set up by Alistair Darling in 2009, to oversee the Asset Protection Scheme, which initially insured these 320 billion assets, was basically controlling GRG as they asset stripped tens of thousands of British and foreign companies. So that's a very quick synopsis. I'm sorry if I've gone on a bit longer than I intended to, but GRG or RBS, if you were in that area in RBS, you were virtually doomed. And this was something backed by the government, and there's been a very real effect on everybody in that area. Okay, thank you for your time.
Wow. Steve, that was incredible. I mean, I know quite a bit about this stuff, and you've just shared some information that's about as hard-hitting as it can be. We're going to be going to Clive May in just a moment, and then after Clive's spoken, then Chris has spoken, then Mark's spoken, we'll have a general Q&A. So I'm sure many of you are itching to make comments and ask questions. Hold on for a minute, we'll get there shortly. But I think you know, that was absolutely superb. I know how long it takes to prepare a presentation that simplifies complexity. So Steve, we all owe you our gratitude for what you've just presented. Can we all please show our appreciation to Steve Middleton? That was first class. Thank you very, very much indeed. Well done, man. Very, very well done. And let's now go straight to Clive May. We're doing pretty good on the timekeeping front, folks. Let's keep the pace nice and fast like this. It's excellent. Mr. Clive May, please take yourself off mute and go for it, sir. Thank you.
Evening. Can everyone hear me?
Yes, indeed. Splendid.
Apologies if it all goes up or if it all goes wrong. The nearest I got to Zoom was a few weeks ago is Fat Larry's band, and here I am now speaking to everybody. So if it does all go wrong, apologies. So I was a bricklaying contractor, and I still am. Unfortunately, we banked with RBS. The construction industry had its worst downturn back in 2008, 9, 10. We were doing okay, but you know, like everybody else, the money wasn't there. The rates started going down, but RBS decided we were in a business that they didn't want to no longer support, and unfortunately, it's led to me sat here tonight. So, first slide: RBS is asset scrap. Our RBS increased. I'm sorry, can we go? Oh, there you go. Our RBS increased its security by deceiving the customer. That's me. Next slide, please, Alexandra. So as an extract of a letter, I'll give you a bit of background. 2010, without my knowledge, RBS put us into GRG, it's credit relationship management. At the same time they were saying we were distressed, one of our customers who supplied us the materials, who banked with RBS and used RBS invoice finance, upped his credit insurance on my company from 100,000 to 150,000. So at the same time they're saying we're distressed, they're giving one of our suppliers 150,000 cover on us to supply us. The letter, this extract here, induced to obtain PGs, this was in 2011. And if you see number 5, they say they take a guarantee to cover the 25 element of the EFG loan. However, checked with my legal department on this point, they advised me it has to be 142,000 guarantee in order to match the loan amount. He goes on to add, whilst the guarantee would be for 142,000, your liability to the bank would be 25% of the EFG loan balance. The bank always said there was no evidence in writing to suggest I was ever told that. This is an extract from one of the letters the specialised relationship manager sent to me. In the same letter, and the next slide please, Alexandra, he says, overdraft letter just released, just issued to the limited company. He apologises if the overdraft letter I've just seen the past week may be a little confusing. You know, he's talking to a bricklayer. Essentially, it's been necessary to itemise both new security to be taken as well as the new stuff in detail. He adds then, whilst it may appear that we are significantly increasing your guarantees, the end result is that in reality, we are reducing your personal guarantee liability exposure. So what exactly was our exposure? Next slide, please, Alexandra. So you'll see in the year, we've got, you know, on the left-hand side column, PG's taken 2009, personal guarantee of 200,000, our unit, security, our overdrafts 200,000. If you scroll down to it, where it's 2011-12, this is the extract of this is the same time or an extract from that letter. They had 427,000 personal guarantees. They had 95,000 on our unit. They'd obtained 103,000 from the government security. They also wanted to take a charge on our property and me and the wife to put another personal guarantee in. So for £955,000 security, in return, we got an overdraft of 50,000. In the background, there was a hidden liability of 150,000 that we knew nothing about. Because we refused to sign a charge on our house, the overdraft was steadily reduced. So for £665,000, for a few months, we got a £40,000 overdraft. Going into 2012, we got a 20,000 overdraft. By March, April 2012, our overdraft was zero. We were employing over 100 brickies, paying them weekly. You know, how are we supposed to work with no overdraft? The payment terms in construction went anything from 30 days right up to over 100 days. RBS, having secured their position with the EFG, decided, you know, unless we gave them £955,000 security for £50,000 overdraft, they would give us nothing. Next slide, please, Alexandra. I was one of the people that gave evidence to Clifford Chance back in February 2014. My evidence I gave to Clifford Chance basically showed what I would say is RBS's fraud. I mean, it's not covered here. But as a result of that, after 2 years with both myself and my MP fighting about the RBS had missold the EFG on the basis of liability, they suddenly released our personal guarantees in full. I got an email from the debt management saying there's only one personal guarantee in place, and if you give us 1,800 quid, you know, you can walk away. In the background, when Promontory, the skilled persons were appointed by the FCA to investigate these allegations that all came about from the Tomlinson's allegations, I've got an email from Executive Complaints, which is Ross McEwen's, basically saying that they gave the information they gave to Promontory was two personal guarantees to a value of 255,000. They forgot to add in the rest of them, taking up to 655,000. You know, they probably knew how it would look. Why would someone ask for 655,000 for an overdraft of 50,000? Next slide, please, Alexandra. So Royal Bank of Scotland invoice finance, which is the crux of how we went into GRG in the first place. How did it work? My MP, Right Honourable David Anson, wrote to both RBS and the FCA. The FCA said there'd be a notational 10% limit registered against our name, but it wouldn't affect our borrowing ability. Well, clearly our overdraft was going down as our security was going up. RBS said to David Anson, this is Ross McEwen, he said there'd be a full liability registered against us, but it wouldn't affect our borrowing ability. Well, again, clearly it did. You know, I mean, they're working this out to suit themselves. Next slide, please, Alexandra. So Royal Bank of Scotland terms to their clients says, if you give a limit over 5,000, you need to obtain a net worth credit to show more than 3 times of the limit they were going to ask on us. So RBS asked or gave 150,000 credit insurance by their client to supply us with materials. At the same time, in the EFG, they were telling the government, in order so they could get the EFG, which basically all they did was use it to repay off our overdraft. On the online portal for the EFG, they said, do you confirm that after taking any available security, the inadequacy of the applicant's security would otherwise prevent a facility from being provided, except with the backing of the enterprise finance guarantee? So they said yes. So on one hand, they're telling the government that there's no security available. On the other, they're telling their clients, if he wants to get insurance on us, and they gave it, we've got to show a net worth of 3 times the value. So something clearly wrong there. Next slide, please, Alexandra. So call this a back of the net. Despite mis-selling the EFG, in 2016, RBS claimed 75% on the government guarantee. In 2015, they were forced to admit mis-selling this scheme to over 2,200 businesses. But it seems like, according to RBS, I wasn't one of them. And if it wasn't for James Early at the Times, my MP, we raised it, they would never have got this mis-selling scandal out in the first place. Next slide, please, Alexandra. So how did they get away with hidden liabilities? On the left-hand side, you'll see it says schedule of third-party providers. And in this instance, it was me and my wife. At the bottom of this, it says, the bank may permit new liabilities or vary existing security, e.g. grant a new loan or increase or renew an existing overdraft facility, without advising the providers of the third-party security. So basically what they could do is, once they got the security, they could do whatever they could, say with the RBS invoice finance, they could put liabilities against the third-party providers, no reason to tell them anything. This is how they were getting away with it. And for me, it's a disgrace. So in a nutshell, what RBS did was they destroyed a viable company asking for additional security while reducing the facilities. And I'm sat here now after 10 years fighting this bank, you know, basically telling the tale. RBS, you know, their whole operandus, whatever it is, was to destroy viable businesses. We were one of them. So I don't know if I've got over my time or under my time, but, you know, that's my sorry little tale regarding RBS invoice finance.
Clive, I don't know whether you've gone over or under your time either. Frankly, I don't care right now. It is tragic what's happened to you and many people like you, and I'm sure everybody on this session salutes you, Clive, for having the resilience to stay strong and stand up and to have the courage to say what you've just said, because that won't have been easy. I know that, we all know that. And by the way, with all massive respect to every bricklayer in the world, that's got to be the best PowerPoint presentation and speech by a bricklayer ever on any of these sorts of matters. Can we please all put our hands together to thank Clive? That was awesome. Absolutely awesome. Absolutely awesome. Well done, sir. Very well done. We'll get to the Q&A bit in a minute. We're now going to go to Mr. Chris Gordon. And Chris, Alexander's going to take care of the slides for you. So just first of all, tell us a bit about yourself, Chris, and then we'll get on to Mr. Mark Wright. Thank you, Chris.
Hello, everybody. I'm primarily an estate agent that did work, building work as well. I had a building company in Northern Ireland, which is within the FCA regulated zone. As everybody will know from all the different debates about Brexit, Northern Ireland is part of the UK and the FCA is our regulator. Between 2008 and 2012, my bank was Ulster Bank Limited. I had a very good relationship with them inside and outside the bank. A number of the directors in the bank were my friends, and I attended as their guests, like lots of functions with them, and was privy to private chats as well as sort of an everyday business banking relationship. In May 2012, I complained to the bank that I had been, the way I had been treated, being told that further construction monies were coming when they were never coming. What we found out recently via my colleague Claire Leonard in Dublin is that actually all Ulster Bank Limited customers in Ireland were placed into non-core GRG no later than the 31st of October 2008. I would ask everybody to remember that date, so everybody in Ulster Bank was in GRG unbeknown to them. in 2008. In May 2012, I made a complaint to the bank. The complaint alleged a number of frauds, one of which was that I had been sold regulated swaps, i.e. Hidden credit lines, hardcore debt within my facilities unbeknown to me. As you'll see in some of the next slides, we can prove that that was the case. The bank told me they would reply to the complaint by the 19th of June 2012. Now, everybody, I'm sure, will remember there was a 6-week period nobody could access their bank accounts in the UK or in Ireland. And I will now prove and allege what really happened was an attempt to destroy the evidence that these credit lines were actually in our loans. As the computers went down, our parliaments called the RBS directors to the various parliaments on the record and asked them what had happened. They stated that they would publish what happened within months. It's now 9 years later, and nothing has been published by RBS or Ulster Bank about what happened. The only body that has published anything is the FCA, and it published it 2 years later. And I will allege that the publication of that false document is not true. In 2008, as we can now prove, we were all placed in GRG, but yet when the Tomlinson allegations came out alleging same 5 years later, George Osborne said that the Tomlinson allegations were shocking, but as Steve's just shown, it was the Treasury that was actually behind the whole operation in regards to the Asset Protection Agency, and he was in charge of that. And we've got those from the National Archives, those documents as well. In January 2014, the FCA said they published their original Section 166 report in the third quarter of 2014. I think we know that that didn't happen until about 4 years later when it was leaked to the BBC. In 2014, the FCA published a document and fined RBS £42 million for the IT glitch, and the official report said it was a problem with their batch scheduler. This allowed them to then proceed and sell a further £29 billion worth of loans across Ireland. There was a secret agreement signed up between RBS and CA Technology, the RBS software provider, at the end of 2014. And the FCA did nothing about that, and that is public knowledge. Between January 14 and 17, as we all know, there was false summaries published into GRG as the loans over here were further sold, who should have been compensated under those FCA IRHP reviews, as I'll show you later. Can we go to screen 2 or slide 2, please, Alexandra? So by mistake, my managers would email me screenshots of the platform of RBS Ulster Bank before the glitch happened, okay? So if you look at the top right-hand side of the left-hand side screen, it says total agreed exposure, discretion allowed, and then on the right-hand side, you will see that that's one of maybe 5 different IRD swap lines that were inserted into my accounts. So when I complained in May 2012, the banks knew I could prove with their old pre-glitch system that what the customers in Ireland had been sold in Ulster Bank, that they were told it was fixed rate loans, were actually IRHPs, okay? So we should have all been within the FCA IRHP review. Within the facility documentation, it also stated that we were sold ISDA contracts, which are, I believe, a MiFID business, which should never have been sold to any retail clients in the UK or Ireland. So again, if you look at that screen, that is the only image that, and I have a few of them, that exist of the pre-glitch RBS computers, okay? If you look again, that A30 IRD swap line, interest rates hedging, the bank's always denied that Ulster Bank sold any swaps, but that is a screenshot of their computer system. If we move on to the next slide, please, Alexandra. So what had RBS done to its Ulster Bank customers pre-glitch that could be proven by these screenshots. Why did the FCA have to be dishonest and produce a false IT glitch report? So what Ulster Bank actually did was sell us fixed rate loans, which were actually regulated IRHP with ISDA clauses, which took, unbeknown to us, our properties for their benefit. They'd opened credit lines in our name, charged the interest up front for the full term, which breached our loan to value on the bank's computer system. Now, as per the Morley trial, the evidence given shows that this was done on purpose. So unbeknown to me, I had 5% added to my debts while being told what I had were just fixed rate loans. They also had the expiry date of the loans when they were sold. So my expiry dates were October 2010, because I was sold them in October 2008. But 2 months after I was sold the loans, as we can now prove, everybody in Ireland was put into RBS non-core. The bank have always denied that. The FCA have always denied that. Mason, Hayes and Curran, Clifford Chance, all the different solicitors' reports have always found no evidence that any viable customers were harmed in any way. So in Ireland, every customer was put into non-core. They then insured the losses that would be generated from that with the APA, and Steve talked you through how that would happen. And any further funding request had to be approved by the Treasury. So we all thought we were dealing with our banks, but we were actually, as Steve proved, dealing with the Treasury, who had to authorise any further lending. Again, none of us got into the IRHP review because I allege the FCA published that fake report and didn't tell the truth about what really happened to the Ulster Bank computers. Now, why that matters is that if they had have told the truth, if you imagine 16,000 corporate and business customers who were, unbeknown to them, transferred to non-core in December 2008, even through the review, the compensation would have been tens of billions of pounds. As we all know, RBS was insolvent in September 2008. That type of liability would have made RBS insolvent again, okay? So that's why the FCA was dishonest and published that false IT glitch report. If we move on to the next slide, please, Alexandra. That's the actual effect of the APA GRG strategy in Northern Ireland. So 1,000 men in that time period took their own lives at the hands of the banks. Because it was so serious over here, and it didn't really reach the press in mainland UK, but that's how bad it was. 1,000 people and all their families still don't know the truth. If you look at the right-hand side of the screen, the bankers were brought to our parliament because of the amount of priests and ministers from different dioceses going to our parliament and saying, there's something wrong out there. All these builders are accusing the banks of mistreatment. The date on that was the 23rd of September 2010. We have 2 hours of the full hearings of that, where those bankers deny they were not lending to viable businesses. Now, the banks couldn't have lended to viable businesses because they were prohibited to because of the agreement that they entered into pre-December 2008. And that agreement has only come to light very recently. But those bankers that attended those hearings, I can now prove as well, met beforehand to get their stories straight. So the families of those suicide victims don't know that, number one, they were targeted through the transfer to non-core. Number two, they were sold hidden interest rate hedging products. Number three, their companies didn't fail. Their companies were all viable at the point of transfer. So the FCA, whenever they published their full unredacted report, and it was leaked in February 2018, it still doesn't mention that everybody in Northern Ireland was to be put out of business through a strategy that was developed pre-December 2008. That's the human cost. And that's what I want to get across. That is the type of thing that's not being properly reported on. That's all those families out there that still don't know their husbands or whatever were targeted by RBS and this insurance scheme, by the way, which documents Steve still can't get the full the accession agreements to those. As you heard from him, they're saying that they're commercially sensitive. The reason they're commercially sensitive is they would prove that those men that took their lives were targets of that commercial enterprise, so to speak. So what happened to me in my story is in the next slide. 2013 and again in 14, I contacted the FCA about the IT glitch, okay? I didn't understand ISDA clauses. I didn't understand interest rate hedging products fully, but I still had the screenshots of the pre-glitch system. The next day, RBS took all my properties. In 2015, I sent the evidence to the FCA, and the head of the bank, who'd been in charge of the computers on the night that they went down, she was a CEO of Ulster Bank, came to my office and asked me what I wanted. I told her that I'd given the evidence to the police and the FCA and the Garda at the time the computers were down. The bank then sold every property I had the next day. The FCA then sent a letter confirming receipt of my evidence, but that was 2 months after I sent it to them. So I would say there was some behind the scenes chat was, go and sort that out. I've been with, sent the crime reports into the National Crime Agency, Serious Fraud Office, and eventually went into the police and sat with them in an interview room where they told me they were not allowed to investigate it. So I'm taking in a crime that happened to so many people that committed suicide, and the police told me, and still tell me, they're not allowed to investigate. Between 2012, when the computers went down, and 2014, any solicitor or barrister I went near got retained by the bank not to take claims against it. Each solicitor that I had or barrister never returned the evidence that I'd given them, the original evidence, and they were retained not to take action against the bank. Finally, and that was a period of really bad depression. So I went down the hill then and gave up the fight. Eventually, 2018, I went to the FCA AGM, held up a photograph of all the GRG victims in Dublin who were organising meetings together. And Charles Randall asked if I wanted to meet Mark Stewart and some of the FCA executives in charge of the investigations. I met them, I gave them all the evidence, I gave them the recordings, I gave them the suicide transcripts. This was before the FCA cleared RBS GRG and said there was no evidence, okay? So they had the evidence before they cleared them. The police here told me to go to the Scottish police because the RBS IT centre where the glitch occurred was located in Edinburgh within their jurisdiction. Whenever the FCA cleared all GRG executives, I went back to the economic crime team in Police Scotland and said, how's the investigation going with the FCA? And they said they could not get any replies from the FCA. That's all in emails. At that point then, I tried to take a claim against the bank and I added the regulators into the claim against them. Andrew Bailey, the FCA and the PRA. Through my colleague Claire in Dublin, she unearthed evidence that showed that the PRA itself, the Bank of England in 2014, had ordered the Ulster Bank to dispose of all its remaining customers by no later than the end of 2016. So on one hand, the FCA was telling the public it was investigating the allegations. On the other hand, the Bank of England was telling the bank to dispose of all the rest. So number one, the Irish customers never got into the IRHP review. Number two, as the regulators told the public and the media they were investigating the allegations, the PRA, with Andrew Bailey in charge, was telling the bank to dispose of the rest. There was a large amount of farmers who committed suicide in the north and south on top of the builders who'd originally been targeted in 2010 at that point. Whenever I got my claim amended, I took the allegations to the Serious Fraud Office about the regulators. They didn't action anything to do with the regulator allegations. They came back to me with a series of questions about the small element to do with Ulster Bank. And in March 2020, this time last year, we went to the High Court with the case against Andrew Bailey, and the Treasury Select Committee called him in front of them to answer the allegations, okay? He said 1 year and 1 month ago to them that what I was alleging was conspiracy, it had no merit. The bank denied the allegations about the IT glitch. Now, this is despite me taking the evidence and the recordings and the videos to the FCA that proves it's all true. I gave them the mobile phone number for the ex-head of Ulster Bank and said, there's a phone number, phone her and ask her if it is true. In the meantime, after we served our amended claim, with the help of Steve and some of the financial experts to put what really happened into legal speak and financial speak, RBS then applied to change its name to NatWest. And that was last summer. Baroness Noakes, who'd been in charge of the worst period, stood down from the bank, and then the Ulster Bank applied to the Belfast court on the same day as a review into my case to close down and transfer all its assets over to England. So at the same time as the IRHP review by John Swift was due to be published last September, it was delayed further, and the bank applied to close down fully. The regulators had fought me for about a year at that point, saying that Northern Ireland was not their jurisdiction, and they wanted the case transferred to London. So while that was all going on, the bank was applying to close itself down. The head of the Bank of England, Andrew Bailey, was saying that what I was alleging was conspiracy and that he had no claim to answer. But a strange thing happened at the end of this last year, 2020. If we can move on to the next slide. As you see, that's a claim that I'm trying to take against the bank and the regulators. It's a very, very hard thing to fight. They have the best QCs and barristers available to them. They deny everything. Everything that's given to me, the bank, is doctored. It's been looked over by whistleblowers from within RBS. It's all had bits removed or edited. But you see the screenshot of the Freedom of Information Act request 7771 from the FCA. That was the final piece of the puzzle, because I was asking them, had the people that designed the original scheme that put us all non-core, who were they? And they came back and said, it's a matter of public record that Andrew Bailey designed the Asset Protection Agency and GRG. They also mentioned John Payne and said that as they were investigating it, they never informed the FCA board that they had designed it. So John Payne was in the FSA, Andrew Bailey was in the FSA. They designed a scheme to save RBS that put all the customers into non-core to be asset stripped. They made the managers, the senior managers, sign up to a secrecy clause to get the government money that we wouldn't be told we were in it. So we were all going ahead on the basis that we thought we had viable companies, but we didn't. They were firmly in control of the whole thing. Now, that Freedom of Information Act request from the FCA I found very strange, but at that point in time I forwarded it to some of the media. And if you go on to the last slide, I'll end there. That's where the media like James Hurley, Andy Verity, Adam Luck finally got the source of the story, that Andrew Bailey designed the whole RBS GRG scandal. He was part of the design with Charles Randall, who is the chairman of the FCA. So as these people were putting out all these denials and all these false summaries into what really happened, it was because if Promontory had been allowed to look into the root cause of the GRG problem, they would have pointed the finger at Andrew Bailey. So therefore, he had his name removed from anything to do with any of the GRG reports, just like he did with the next scandal that came out with Dame Gloucester. That's why he was given that job, was to basically continue the cover-up of what really happened in 2008 that led to all those suicides. Those people out there who lost loved ones still do not know that their families were targeted as part of the scheme, because there's so many official Clifford Chance, Mason Hayes and Curran reports that cleared the bank of any wrongdoing. But not just that, the regulators published the false summaries. So even the IRHP review was falsified because the people that were affected by the real cause of the glitch in 2012 never got into it. So it's like a David and Goliath struggle. It's lasted 9 years now. There's lots of very helpful people who are volunteering to help to get this out there in different formats. And that's where we're at today. We had a review yesterday and the FCA has abandoned its jurisdiction claim, saying that it's no longer going to say Northern Ireland isn't part of its jurisdiction, but they want a costs order against me for them taking the application in the first place. And now they're attempting to strike out the case on the 29th of June this year. So thank you very much, everybody. That's basically where it comes from my point of view in Northern Ireland. And I'll pass you back to Andy.
This shouldn't have happened, should it?
Not at all.
This shouldn't
It's
have happened.
terrible what happened. I still work with these people. I still meet people whose loved ones committed suicide. I still deal with them every day, and I, try and tell them as much as I can. But I'm basically telling them something that the Bank of England, the Financial Conduct Authority, Andrew Bailey sat in the Treasury Select Committee, didn't tell the FCA board as he cleared RBS that he designed the whole scam to start with. And those people are still going about their lives genuinely thinking that their loved ones' companies failed, failed business people. They weren't. They were targeted.
They're murderers.
There was no compensation. Sorry?
They're murderers. Murderers.
Yes. So that's where we're at. Those people still don't know, because of all the fake reports, because of all the solicitor cover-ups, what really happened. And I could have taken the money in 2015 from the head of the bank. I could have then not showed to everybody what the IT glitch was about. The official stories into that are not true. They front-loaded all the interest in these secret loans they put onto their balance sheet to bust the customers as part of a secret swap selling process.
Chris, we're all gravely indebted to you, and I don't quite know what to say. And those of you that know me know that's pretty unusual. Yeah, Chris, what's happened to you should never have happened. This is the very worst kind of conduct imaginable.
When you say me, yes, I'm lucky that I'm still here and able to tell a story. There are so many people. They don't even, when they go to the solicitors meetings in Belfast, they don't even, some of them have enough money for the parking meter. They've had their homes taken from them. They haven't just had their companies, they've had their personal ability to even work. Some of them have passed away since we've started having the group meetings. They've never got to hear the truth or have any justice. I can think of I've seen no bigger crime when I look around the world than what I see has occurred with Ulster Bank. And that's why they're closed. That's why all these delays to the 166, because the Bank of England was ordering. We have this in writing. They were ordering this to happen as the FCA and these people were telling James Hurley and all the journalists, we're still working on this.
Chris, I think of myself as a pretty tough, streetwise kind of guy, experienced, knowledgeable, insightful, and all that stuff. Speaking man to man, so to speak, one person to another person, one human being to another human being, I am absolutely in awe of you in being strong enough to cope with this and clear-headed enough to articulate what's happened in such a clear way. I think that I don't know what we're going to do. I really don't, but I do know this. We're going to try as hard as we can to do anything we can to help, because there's going to come a day when we all leave this earth. You know what I'm saying? You know, there's going to come a day when we all leave this earth. And when that day comes for me, and I'm sure everybody else on this session, I want to know that we didn't just stand by, we stood up. You know, this is the equivalent. This is taking me back to primary school, Chris. This is the equivalent of being in the frigging playground, excuse my language, being in the frigging playground when you're like 6, seeing like an 11-year-old beating up one of your mates. You know, what do? You've got a choice. You either run, freeze, or pile in there. And one way or another, ladies and gentlemen, we need to learn how to collectively pile in there to help the people that have been picked on by bullies. I can't think of any other way of saying it. It doesn't really feel right, but it kind of feels wrong not to. Can we please put our hands together for what Chris has just said? Because that's just like, I don't know what else to say.
Chris, if you weren't a strong person, you may have committed suicide yourself.
Yes, yes.
I've been
2013.
in that position and still am.
I spoke to
Cheers, everybody.
They killed my husband. They killed my husband.
Eva, we'll come to you, Eva. We'll come to you. I promise we will come to you. I had 2 conversations last Tuesday. It's not a very cheery conversation, I know, folks, but let's just say it. I had 2 conversations last Tuesday. I'll never forget it. Same bleeding day. 2 people talking about killing themselves. It's completely different situations, both ultimately affected by scams, scandals, rip-offs, regulatory failure, and all that kind of stuff. And we all, that's it. Enough is enough. We must all learn how to work together, fight together, pile in on the 11-year-old who's picking on the 6-year-old. That's somehow what we need to do. Chris, thank you very much. I will be forever in your debt for sharing that story so clearly and frankly so calmly. Let's go to Mr. Mark Wright. Mark, pick it up from here, please, before I fall.
Well, I again, well done, Chris. Your strength and you, Clive, and a brilliant presentation, Steve, as always. I want to apologise now on behalf of my former employer, NatWestern Royal Bank of Scotland, 25 years, and I get no joy over what I'm now going to share with you. I know we're pushed for time. I did mention to Alexandra that I'm sure that you'd rather see clear evidence than a Q&A session of 5 to 15 minutes afterwards. And if you have any questions that you want to ask either Chris or myself or Steve or Clive, then send them into Alex and we'll answer them all and send them back, or I'll put my email address up shortly. But I really do feel that you need to see what I'm now going to show you. So I'll go straight in.
Just before you do that, I've just made an executive decision. The session's finishing at 9 o'clock. Okay, if you need to leave at 8, everyone go at 8. That's cool, but we're not going to rush this. This is too important to rush. So, Mark, take your time. Tell us what needs to be told, and go for it. Thank you.
Okay, you can all see the first. It says RBS robbing the very citizens that bailed them out. Can it really get any worse? Can you see all that? Yeah.
Yes, we can.
Good. Okay, so moving on from where Steve picked up on Rory Cullinan, it's a perfect place for me to start because obviously Steve done an excellent presentation on the APS, but let us continue our focus on Rory Cullinan, also known as Mr. GRG. What I have to show you next is an internal GRG PowerPoint. It was RBS's bragging document explaining how well they were doing, busting customers and stealing their assets, and they were ahead of plan. Rory Cullinan, front page of the roundtable PowerPoint. First page, what have we done? I haven't put the whole 15 slides on here. I'm just picking out certain bits. What we've done, first bit on the first page, work with HM Treasury and their advisors to identify high risk and capital intensive assets from across the group. Why? Increase capital ratios. It was always about increasing tier 1 capital ratio that RBS are so sensitive and protective over. Moving on, despite hundreds and hundreds of suicides, stealing SMEs' life's work, just look how well we are doing. Remember the date on the top of the PowerPoint, 5th of November 2013. From January 2009 until the date of this PowerPoint, 5th of November 2013, we've been able to improve tier 1 capital ratio by 89k per minute. That's not a typo. 89k for every single minute. That's 5,340,000 per hour in that period. That sickens me. Absolutely sickens me. And here we have in the PowerPoint bragging they're ahead, has beaten asset reduction targets and 89 grand every minute since January 2009. RBS has always been very sensitive about tier 1 capital ratio, so they needed to turn cannibal on their own customers, the very customers that bailed them out. I mean, I'm getting quite emotional just talking about this. It's just horrendous. I've got internal spreadsheets from RBS. And again, there's so much to this spreadsheet that I've cut off, but I just wanted to show you why it was beneficial to distress performing loans. And if you look here, this is year 1 spreadsheet, you'll see that high risk and performing loans, tier 1 capital ratio, 12%. The next spreadsheet shows what happens if we create default, and we can increase tier 1 capital ratio by 1.03% for the first year. Capital ratio improved following loan default. So who knew what? Who did I report this to? What was I trying to do for all the SMEs who have had their life's work stolen? Simple. I followed the process for any whistleblower and report it. And I did that to hopefully to help the SMEs and get redress they deserve. So let me take you back to the conduct of the current Bank of England governor, former CEO of the FCA. You'll understand now when I state, based on all that I have, Mr. Bailey is the greatest danger to the financial system and the public. He is simply the king of cover-up. Let me explain, and then you can all make your own informed choice. This is Mr. Bailey emailing me at midday on a Saturday in September 2016 as CEO of the FCA. Very briefly, he's saying, Mr. Wright, can I step in? Please direct correspondence to me as chief executive rather than to my colleagues. He wanted all of my PIDA disclosures going to him only and nobody else. So we have the CEO of the FCA wanting everything from me personally. So ask yourself, why is he doing it? Why has he asked me just to go to him? The answer is simple. He knew I was always factually 100% correct with all my PIDA disclosures. So he could not only control them, but keep them buried, which today he has achieved quite well. Moving on. This is Mr. Bailey emailing me and saying, I'm very keen to see this information. So while we may already have the PowerPoint presentation system on the FCA servers, I'd be grateful if you would send a copy for the completeness. Moving on, I had other whistleblowers, and they deliberately caught Bailey out because there's a 15-page PowerPoint how GRG were busting customers and why it was beneficial. So they basically go to and say, apologies for our lack of attention to detail, because the first email they sent, they forgot to attach the PowerPoint. They said, please confirm that you have all 13 pages. Bailey comes back and says, thanks, but to be precise, it's 15 slides in all, but 13 of substance if the first and last are not counted as the title page and the disclaimers respectively. There's no plausible deniability here, ladies and gents. He had the document that proved that RBS had to target SMEs and steal their assets to improve tier 1 capital ratio. So he's already confirmed that he has the RBS GRG PowerPoint, he has the spreadsheets, he knows the tier 1 improvement, and he's also got the commentary that RBS GRG were deliberately busting SMEs to steal their life's work. Moving down further, I'm forwarding him another email trail, but look who's underneath. It was already sent in January 16 to Tracy McDermott and Nausicaa Delphas. I basically went to them with the PowerPoint, with the spreadsheets, with the commentary, and I asked them, have you considered the above in the 166 RBS GRG review? If not, why not? Or did you just delete without reading? No answer. Although I have a read receipt. So again, no plausible deniability here. Some content below, which I'm now going to just highlight certain bits, not going to go into too much depth because it's all going to be there for you all to have at some point, and you can come direct back to me. So just to save time, I'll just highlight some key bits I wanted to show. So basically, this is the benefit in a regulatory capital which RBS would achieve by defaulting high risk but otherwise performing loans within GRG. GRG would achieve a regulatory capital benefit for core tier 1 capital ratios when defaulting high risk, but otherwise performing. These are all performing customer loans. Okay. So basically, you know, none of this was mentioned in the Clifford Chance review. Parliamentary committee questioning senior employees. The question, why not? The answer, because the model would clearly demonstrate the regulatory capital benefit achieved by defaulting high-risk performing customer loans. And like I say, RBS are so sensitive, NatWest, with regards to their tier 1 capital ratio for the bank stress testing, etc. The Clifford Chance review is grossly incorrect and misleading in respect of statements made regarding financial incentives for GRG. And basically, won't go through to, but basically using simple arithmetic, it can be proven that RBS GRG would be able to improve the bank's core tier 1 capital ratio by defaulting customer loans. It's plain and simple. You know, and if we look at 9.13 above, states that risk-weighted assets and expected loss requirements would be likely to increase in the case of defaulted customers. That's totally incorrect. Defaulted loans attract no risk-weighted assets. Risk-weighted assets are held against performing loans to address the risk of unexpected loss. But once a loan has defaulted, there cannot be any unexpected loss. So risk-weighted assets must always decrease for defaulted loans. Hence why we had the culture that has destroyed so many lives and so many families. Again, West Register was granted a regulatory capital a risk weighting waiver by the FSA, July 2011. It was a public letter. This meant the unit carried a 0 risk weighting. This would further enhance the bank's regulatory capital position when defaulting high risk performing loans and purchasing the distressed real estate assets into West Register. What really sickens me though, and this will really, this is off the scale, what I'm now going to show you. But the following is from the GRG and West Register Policy and Procedures Manual. And it's got here the mission statement. To acquire property from distressed situations where taking ownership is determined to be the best way to maximize recovery and to create additional value through active asset management with a view to exiting when market conditions are more opportune. That's their mission statement. If that was not bad enough, the next will sicken you even more. In fact, it's off the scale. Because what they were doing when they had stolen all of these assets, they were told in their manual that they had to send a victory email to the primary case manager. A victory email upon acquisition of the SME assets. That is, whoever even created that document, nothing is would suffice what is that person deserves. Again, GRG West Register Policy Procedures Manual, victory email. Once you know, victory, we've got the assets. They got nothing. And I got this next bit from Clive May, and Clive told me this story. How can you imagine how an SME's wife felt when her husband was found laying face down in the river, that they had already sent a victory email for stealing his life's work? So the conclusion, based on Steve's excellent asset protection scheme presentation, and now this: state sponsors theft, and it does not matter how many casualties there are. To the board of NatWest, they are simply account numbers and sort codes. They're not mums, dads, brothers, sisters, nans, granddads. Just an account number. Just simply heartbreaking. I now want to move on to, very briefly, and talk about signature forgery on an industrial scale at RBS NatWest. Let me show you Andrew Bailey when he was questioned by Nicky Morgan about signature forgery when she was chair of the Treasury Select Committee. Watching Mr. Bailey, watch his body language and watch his response. And I'm now going to put it in here for you.
Forgeries of customer signatures at RBS. Now, as I understand it, in February 2017, the FCA was provided with evidence regarding these possible forgeries. Can you tell us how you followed up? The FCA followed that up.
The problem, I'm afraid, is that this is a long saga that actually there are a lot of claims that we have been provided with evidence, which frankly, I'm afraid are not supported. And so just so you know, I've written to, well, I've got in touch with Norman Lamb again. It's not the first time I've done this, to say, really pleased, we are happy to meet you. Because we found it very difficult to actually meet these people.
So have you since, either before or since the story was published on Sunday, done a trawl for emails or information?
We are redoing a trawl. We've actually done them many times before, but we are redoing it, frankly, for the avoidance of any doubts. Moreover, as I said, I have, since the report came out on Sunday, once again contacted the Lamb's office and said, we would like to meet you, please. You are welcome to come and see us.
Do you think there's any substance in the allegations that RBS were trained how to forge customer signatures and that they subsequently carried out?
I prefer to frankly reserve judgment on that until I see the evidence, because I think that we have to take it very seriously. Clearly, if anybody makes any allegation of that nature against any firm, it's different.
So just for the record, so when I next see Mr. Lamb in the corridors of Westminster, I'm able to say that you are happy to meet both him and the person who's contacted.
Please do. I would welcome that.
I don't think I've graduated to being a diary secretary yet, but I shall certainly pass that on to his office. Thank you for that, John.
Thank you. Good afternoon. Just a couple of very quick questions before I get on to.
Okay, you can end that there now. Okay, so we all sort of like heard what Mr. Bailey stated, and I'm just going to highlight some of the key bits that he said. He said this is a long saga. Lots of claims we have been provided with evidence. I am afraid they are not supported. Got in touch with Norman Lamb MP again, and it's not the first time. Will you please, he's stating, Norman Lamb, we're happy to meet you because we have found it very difficult to meet these people. He prefers to reserve judgment until he has seen the evidence, and we have to take it seriously. And then at the end there, he said, yeah, please do tell Mr. Lamb. I would welcome that, while smirking. Let me show you some details. Now, we all know what Bailey said to those members of Parliament at the Treasury Select Committee. What he should have said to Nicky Morgan and the TSC, if he was acting with honesty and integrity, I gave him the name of the signature forgery trainer, where it was, how it was done, what scale it was. almost a year earlier. I named the signature forgery trainer, the office, the area, the region. He could then turn around and he could have said, hold on a minute, I was actually also contacted by another whistleblower who was actually trained by this signature forgery trainer in its week 1 induction course. So he was trained how to lift the customer's signature from the ISV, the specimen signature, image signature verification, and forge it onto documents. Bailey had that. He had it from me on the 1st, and then he had it from the senior relationship manager 3 days later. He could have then turned around and said, but hey, I actually got chased a 3rd time in September 2017. He was given the information 3 times before that TSC hearing. And here's a little bit more of the email. Mr. Bailey, with the shocking BBC news last Friday regarding our colleagues in GRG, we thought we would ask you, as CEO of the Financial Conduct Authority, what you actually did with the content of the email below that we sent to you on Tuesday, February the 28th, 2017 at 12:52. In particular, the part of the final paragraph, which we are again highlighting to you only. As well as a document attached, which again was the PowerPoint and GRG documents, we would like to make the CEO of the FCA aware that our former colleague was the RBS employee in Mr. Wright's region that trained staff to forge signatures onto customer documents without the SME's consent using the custom ISV. Her husband is still an RBS employee. However, at the time when his wife was teaching signature forgery, he was the regional director of commercial banking for the region, working very closely with another husband and wife team at GRG in Cambridge, who have many stories to tell. I would hope that you would agree with us that when you consider what was going on in GRG, that forging a customer's signature is as bad as it gets. Hence us asking the question if you actually shared this intelligence with those who conducted the report. So he said to Nicky Morgan and the TSC that he's never had the information. Can it get any worse? The CEO of the FCA burying a culture at RBS and NatWest that drove SMEs to kill themselves. Sadly, it can, as we are talking about the king of cover-up. So remember what Mr. Bailey stated again. We had a meeting arranged. This is from Norman's office at Portcullis. We had a meeting arranged for the 3rd of May. Bailey cancelled it. You see an email from Norman's office again saying, hello both, I'm holding off contacting RBS, but I have rearranged a meeting with Andrew Bailey for you all for the 25th of September 17. 2 meetings booked in before that TSC hearing. Guess what happened? Bailey cancelled again. Dear Mark and Steve, frustratingly, Andrew Bailey has postponed the above meeting. But he failed to tell the TSC. So I personally believe that unless Andrew Bailey is above Parliament, I believe that's a big deal if you're deliberately lying to Parliament. My conclusion, based on the evidence I have on Andrew Bailey, is simple. When his lips move, he lies. And my advice simply to central banks around the world, be on your guard. For a man that is happy to aid banks in obtaining money via the proceeds of crime, as this man now heads the Bank of England. So good luck. I just want to give a very brief update on Broomhead versus RBS, because you know that obviously the whistleblowers have been helping Jonathan considerably, because Jonathan was destroyed by RBS using fabricated documents, beating him in court when we could only find one genuine document. So we had the first strikeout hearing. So what basically happened at the first strikeout hearing, I think we used 3 senior relationship managers with 50 years of using the systems, knowing all the documents, together with Steve's expertise. We do witness statement for Jonathan, and it was brilliantly covered by Georgia Edkins in the Scottish Mail on Sunday. If Georgia, I think she's on the call, she might put the link to the article in the chat. The master stated that he found the witness statement troubling. Broomhead survived that strikeout, and the master took approximately 3 weeks to pass that judgment. But that wasn't good enough. RBS had to go back for another go. for a second strikeout. So they go back for a second strikeout. We provide an even stronger witness statement with even better exhibits and, you know, documents that cannot be possible. This one takes 3 months for the judgment to come down. And he disregards everything that he found troubling in the first hearing. Now, you can draw whatever conclusions you want why that was deliberately ignored. The fact of the matter is that Broomhead's case, and he's still in litigation, is a huge case, because we know that the only reason RBS beat Broomhead first time round is because they created all the documents to beat him. If they had provided the documents which he was entitled to, he would have won hands down. Had RBS not provided fight documents and provide true and contemporaneous at first creation to the court, the original trial, Broomhead would have won his case without question. Now, NatWest are now trying to bankrupt Broomhead unlawfully for costs for the last 2 strikeout hearings. So we have a state-owned bank bailed out by Broomhead when he had a successful company. They provide fake documents, commit perjury, contempt of court to destroy him, and now have the cheek to bankrupt him for costs and take his home. Nah. So anyway, all is not lost though. So look at the thread below. We have obviously over 50 whistleblowers that feed in, and when me and Steve set up Bank Confidential, it was to protect vulnerable whistleblowers, but there's been more and more NatWest and RBS staff come forward wanting to help the victims, and we are where we are. We had somebody who was not connected with any of the whistleblowers that helped with the witness statements for Broomhead, but was very concerned and couldn't believe what he was hearing. So he asked for permission to have all of Broomhead's exhibits that RBS provide under a DSAR. He asked for the witness statements. He backed up every single thing that the relationship managers and Steve Middleton and myself, we provided in that witness statement. So he decided to go straight to Alison Rose in June, July last year and asked the question. So basically, this is one from April this year. This is to David Litton. Now, David Litton, he's a slippery little character. He's the managing legal counsel. But the RBS employee is asking a very simple question, and it's very easy to answer. One, why did the bank withhold every print connection summary sheet in the Broomhead disclosure? Should have been about 30 of them. The reason being is if he had them, Broomhead would have won his case. That's why they weren't disclosed. Two, confirm that all the exhibits I provided I think that there was exhibits provided to Alison Rose that were used in the case, and he was asking, confirm that all of the exhibits provided used against Broomhead in litigation are all true and original containers from the time of the original first creation. I see no reason why you cannot answer these questions immediately. This is the response. Dear Sir, Madam, thank you for your email. We have nothing to add to our previous responses. So anyway, he's not happy with that. He goes back and takes it a step further. He decides to copy in the entire board. David, that is no answer at all, and I believe gives the impression there is a considerable problem because Alison has never confirmed why Broomhead had all his print connections withheld. Neither has she confirmed that all the documents she has sent personally via the group's disclosure used in court of law are all true and original contemporaneous from the time of the original first creation. If the group has not committed fraud, is that not something Alison as group CEO needs to make clear without hesitation? And let's not forget, as soon as she heard about this in June, July last year, she had a duty to report this. I am a shareholder, as no doubt you are. Therefore, the risk to shareholders, should Alison be aiding fraudulent documents being allowed to be used in a court of law, would have catastrophic consequences to all group shareholders. Would you not agree? I have copied in the entire board now, as I and other whistleblowers now know that our group CEO is happy to condone behaviour by the group in obtaining money via the proceeds of crime. I would have thought all the board will already be aware of our many communications since June, July 2020. Therefore, they must all be complicit to these crimes, unless, of course, Alison has denied the board this intelligence. If any board member is unaware, then please feel free to email me by return. and I will forward what you have been denied. Alison, just answer the question. Thank you. No response, but read receipts from Frank Dangiard, NatWest Non-Executive Director. Patrick Flynn, Non-Executive Director. Morten Fries, Non-Executive Director. Mark Seligman, Non-Executive Director. David Litton, Managing Legal Counsel. Those that have not provided read receipts as yet: Alison Rose, Mike Rogers, Robert Gillespie, Kate Murray, Yasmin Jeffer, Jane Cargill, Howard Davies, Lena Wilson. So I think, you know, good luck, you know, bankrupting Broomhead unlawfully, because all these people are now complicit. And I'm going to leave it there. And I want to thank everybody who's contributed to the crowd justice for the judicial review against for the behaviour at the FCA and the Complaints Commissioner's office. I will put the link to the crowd justice in the, because like I say, if we can get this over the line and make a stand and show the FCA and the Complaints Commissioner what they are, then it's going to help everybody. And if you can't contribute, then please just share the link with all of your email contacts. You know, if everyone can donate £1 and then pass it on to all their contacts, then I'm sure that we can get a decent fighting fund to take these criminals on. But thanks very much for the opportunity, and that was tough to get through.
Mark, we're going to thank you properly in a minute, but yeah, there are times when you just need to lead with your heart and not with your head. So bear with me, folks. Just give me a couple of minutes to do something. The first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to, for a reason I'll explain, is I'm going to put a link to the donation page in the TTF website. So here's our donation page. I'll explain why in a minute. Don't worry, I'm not being greedy. I'm not trying to fleece you. Here's our donation page, and the reason I'm putting that in the chat is because of what I'm about to do. And sometimes you need to do something whether you can do it or not, whether you can afford to do it or not. So I'm just going to share my screen, because hopefully some of you might want to do something similar. It's entirely up to you if you do. But I got my calculator out earlier, and what Mark has just talked about is his campaign. If you haven't already gone here, go here. Mark, please put a link into the chat. So basically, the target is 7,500. That's what the guys need to. Just want to check my maths. That's what the guys need to have a decent chance of fighting this in court. So I'm just doing a bit of maths here. They got 6,265. I'm not particularly good at maths, bear with me. Minus 6,265. 1,235. 1,235. 1,235. Details. Andy, Agathangelo, Andy, that's me. Leave a short message. Good luck, pal. By the way, some of you might know this, pal. Some of you might know this. Mark's son made me cry the other week because I saw a note on this website from Mark's son, and and his son, after his son made a small donation, basically said, put a note in there that said, good luck, Dad. I'm not going to share my screen while I'm putting in my card details. I hope you don't mind. I'm not being funny, but it would be pretty stupid of me to do that, because hopefully this bleeding
there could be someone from NatWest on here, and they'd probably clone it.
That's almost funny. So I'm not going to share my screen just temporarily. Bear with me, folks. But I'm going to try and carry on talking while I'm doing this. So basically, Mark's son put a note on the comments page after his son made a small donation, and the comment was basically, "You can do this, Dad." And it made me cry, and it made me cry because I just imagined what it would be like to be the dad of a family who had been living with all this kind of it. Can you imagine the pressure and stress? There were 10,000 people who killed themselves as a consequence of the global financial crisis. And you can see why, can't you? You know, you can see why people would end up topping themselves. People top themselves for a lot less. They really do, quite literally. And how on earth people like Mark Wright and people like Chris Gordon, who we just heard of, can have the courage and the foresight and the wisdom and the tenacity and everything that matters in life. And they're examples to us all, aren't they? You know, they're examples to us all. So I don't know what's going to happen with your case, Mark. I wish you really well with it, but I do now know that you're committed. You're at the $7.5 grand that you need to do what you need to do. And I'm going to just turn my screen off for a minute, and I'm going to invite everybody to just show their appreciation to Mark, not just for that talk and that evidence, but for everything. Because if Mark and Steve and Chris and all the others get through the other side, then there's a chance that they might actually make the system listen, and that's what the system needs to do. The system needs to listen. People need to be held accountable. People need to be made to change the way they're doing things. And I've said in TGF meetings before that even if we can't make it better for our generation, do we really want our kids and our grandkids living in a world with a toxic financial system? No, we don't. We don't. So for God's sake, do whatever feels natural to you. Whatever feels natural is going to be different for one person to another. But for goodness sake, do whatever feels right for you to help as best as we can. And can we please just put our hands together to thank Mark Wright for everything that he and many others and many others have done.
Thanks so much, Andy, for your generosity. And like I say, even if you can't contribute, just copy the link, send it to all of your contacts in your email addresses, and say, look, you know, we can't keep affording to write the checks for the bank's behavior, and you know, let's see if we can get a sea change, because by God, we need it.
Here. Good on you, Mark. Good on you.
Thank you. I
haven't got any energy to say thanks more than than this. Let's go to Ian Fraser. Mr. Ian Fraser, please take yourself off mute and share your thoughts. Thank you. Please be as time efficient as you can be. Thank you.
Yes, thank you very much to Steve, Clive, Chris, and Mark for those phenomenal presentations. Absolutely mind-blowing. I mean, I knew a lot of the information there, but very, very powerful and very effective presentations. So thank you very much. Chris Gordon mentioned Sheila Noakes, Dame Sheila Noakes, who was an RBS non-exec director and led the cover-up of the GRG affair or scandal. It's quite interesting to note that Dame Sheila Noakes also effectively called for the murder of Gina Miller, the person who led the judicial review over Brexit, on Twitter by saying, "Who will rid us of this meddlesome woman?" So she's not a very attractive person, Sheila Noakes, I don't think, and probably the sort of person they want on the board of what is now called NatWest. I think the problem with this bank really started a long time ago in the 90s, but under Fred Goodwin, from really 1999 onwards, the ethos became more and more corrupted. The aim was to prioritize short-term profits above all else. They clearly did not care about ethics or morality, and they only slightly cared about the rule of law. We also know from the Goodwin years, which were 99 to 2008, that the bank had no qualms about bullying regulators and politicians if they tried to cramp its style or intervene too much in its affairs. All that is documented and shredded. Ever since Goodwin was given the sack by the British government on the 13th of October 2008, the bank has been fundamentally dishonest, I think. There's been honesty has not been something that's really played much of a part in this bank. And now, can we have the first chart, please, Alexandra? It's the Venn diagram. Yeah, this Venn diagram basically shows it basically shows RBS at the epicenter of fraud and wrongdoing, because it's a bank which was hang on a second, I'm gonna have to just move this for a second. It was basically, sorry, 1 second, get this bigger. The bank you know, had low capital, it had a risky funding structure, it had bad lending, it had bad investments and trading, and it had M&A, and it had all of these things. So that is why it is the only bank in the middle of this Venn diagram. Other extremely badly managed or corrupt banks, such as, say, the Irish bank, Anglo-Irish, don't even make it into the center where RBS sits in this chart. The chart was done by the Financial Times, by the way. So that chart, I think, summarizes the position RBS was in at the time of its collapse in 2008, and is pretty much, you know, it has perhaps resolved some of the issues, but on the issue of honesty and on the issue of treating customers fairly, it certainly hasn't changed in the slightest. We had obviously Stephen Hester as the chief executive from October 2008 till October 2013, so a 5-year stretch, when he earned approximately £15 million for being the chief executive of the bank. Arguably, he didn't really do very much to sort it out. He, after all, presided over the Global Restructuring Group scandal, which saw 16,000 businesses and, as we heard earlier, 2.9 individual account holders basically treated like shit. And basically, you know, saw their firm, their businesses deliberately bankrupted in order that the bank could rebuild its capital base. Ross McEwan took over as the chief executive in October 2013, and he lasted until October 2019, so 6 years. And arguably, he wasn't much better. He presided over the continuing cover-up of the Global Restructuring Group scandal. The share price fell 43% while he was the chief executive. There were 42,000 job losses at RBS on his watch. 1,100 branches were closed. 14,000 low-wage jobs were transferred to India by Royal Bank of Scotland. Financial goals, including return on investment and cost-income ratio, were missed. And it became the bottom-ranked bank for customer service. So I would argue it wasn't a huge success, although he did do things such as boost the core tier one capital ratio, which is the sort of thing the government and the Prudential Regulation Authority care most about. So he did achieve that, although Hester had started the process, obviously. Ross McEwan was given a CBE by the British government in December 2019. And to me, the fact he was given this speaks volumes about what the government cares about. I think Boris Johnson was already the Prime Minister by that time. Basically, they want to circle the wagons around wrongdoing, and giving him the CBE as part of that process. They totally ignored his absolutely woeful handling of the GRG scandal, his attempts to suppress the truth, to downplay the significance of what had happened, and to minimize compensation payouts to the victims. So I don't think he really deserved his CBE. So now we have a woman called Alison Rose. She became the chief executive on the 1st of November 2019. And she pledged to make RBS more open, more accessible, and more inclusive. She also said she's going to make some massive cost cuts. She's aiming to cut 3 billion of costs out of RBS on an annual basis by 2025. So she has 4 years to achieve that. And that basically means more branch closures, more job losses, and probably worse, even worse customer service. They obviously have serious problem of the COVID-19 crisis to deal with. Howard Davis said in April 2020, that has changed everything for the bank, and that its effect will be stark and long lasting. They have their annual general meeting in a so-called empty room. And during that meeting on April the 3rd last year, Howard Davis said the banks are under no obligation to repay the favor of the 2008 bailouts by helping businesses to survive the coronavirus crisis. He said that on, he said that on BBC Radio 4 Today. I think they are obviously helping out to some extent with the so-called C-bills loans, so I don't quite get why he said that. Now, the next thing is, oh yes, they started a small, a fintech brand called Bo, which sounds a bit like BO as in body odor, and Alison Rose effectively pulled the plug on this after a £100 million investment in May 2020. The idea was that Bo was going to take on the likes of Monzo, Revolut, and Starling, which are successful online or digital banks, but basically they gave up the ghost and pulled the plug on it in May 2020. So that wasn't a great start for Alison Rose. I mean, we've heard a hell of a lot today about the Global Restructuring Group scandal, and so I won't bore you. I won't talk about this much more, but to me, it is the defining scandal of the bank since it was bailed out in 2008. And I think Andrew Bailey's handling of this scandal has been an absolute disgrace, as we've heard. Basically, the thing started in 2009 when, to resolve the liquidity crisis that the bank found itself in, and the fact that the bailouts were insufficient to ensure its survival, the bailouts that Gordon Brown had given it, which totaled 45.5 billion of fresh capital, the fact that these bailouts were insufficient to ensure the survival of RBS, they decided, as we've heard, to cannibalize their own customer base and to destroy SMEs and to treat them as collateral damage, because saving RBS was the be-all and end-all, and who cared whether or not tens of thousands of successful, viable, creditworthy and profitable SMEs were destroyed in the process. So obviously this decision in itself, which was a political decision, which was followed through by the then management team of Stephen Hester and his board of directors, which included Philip Hampton as chairman, has led to all the subsequent disastrous fallout in terms of damage to people's lives and livelihoods, and the extraordinary cover-up we've seen from the FCA over the past few years, which culminated in their exoneration of RBS in 2018. One thing I find quite, I don't know how much time I've got, but I think one of the interesting things there is the particular role of Andrew Bailey, who from the very start misrepresented the Promontory report. You know, he basically lied about that in a series of summaries, missing out the key findings of the Promontory report. And he then sought to downplay and suppress the truth about what had happened during the RBS GRG scandal. And then, as we know, he basically let off RBS and the perpetrators, all whilst failing to disclose his own massive conflict of interest, which was that he had personally designed the asset protection scheme, which was the massive 280 billion insurance scheme invented under Lord Miners and others, including Alistair Darling, which had driven the GRG scandal. So the mere fact that we now know, thanks to Chris Gordon's court case, that Andrew Bailey was the architect of the APS, which gave rise to the Global Restructuring Group scandal, was a major finding. And so I'm very grateful to Chris Gordon for that. Basically, well, I could talk about Project Amethyst, but I won't talk about that. I mean, the fact that the culture has not changed is self-evident in the fact that Project Amethyst, which was a project from 2010 to 2015 to assess whether investment customers of the bank, people who had ISAs, who had pensions, who had other investment products with RBS, the FCA asked RBS to assess whether whether the bank had acted fairly, had missold any of these products to its customers. And they basically skewed the findings. The bank deliberately skewed the findings to downplay the instances where investment products, including ISAs, had been missold to clients. So there's an ongoing process with that, whereby the FCA has launched another probe into the fact that RBS skewed the original findings. There's now also the money laundering criminal trial, which the FCA has embarked on. So the new head of the FCA, a guy called Nikhil Rathi, has pressed criminal charges on NatWest, as it's now called, over the laundering of about 300 million pounds, 365 million pounds for a totally bent gold dealing company based in Bradford called Fowler Oldfield. So this is the first criminal prosecution the FCA has ever done under the 2007 money laundering regulations. There have been civil cases where they've settled out of court for, civil cases which have resulted in fines of 163 million for Deutsche Bank, 102 million for Standard Chartered, 72 million for Barclays, and 38 million for Commerzbank. So the FCA appears to be finally wanting to prosecute a bank for criminal activity. And this is quite interesting. And what I would ask is why they've chosen to do it with RBS stroke NatWest, and why they're doing it now, because there are so many other instances where they could have prosecuted. And I'll just wind up if that's all right. Basically, so where now for RBS? You mentioned recidivism, Andy. My fear is that squeezed by the near zero interest rate environment that we now find ourselves in, which has basically undermined the entire branch-based retail banking model in the UK and making it unprofitable, RBS stroke NatWest will be tempted to once again ratchet up the mis-selling of opaque financial products, which will generate short-term profits for the bank, but prove financially ruinous for its customers. I hope that isn't too gloomy a note to end on. There are some chinks of light, such as the Dobbs review, which could be very, very serious for Lloyds Banking Group and the entire banking sector, and the John Swift review about interest rate hedging products, and over the FCA's previously flawed review of the mis-selling of the redress scheme for these. So there are some chinks of light, and that's where I'll end, if that's all right.
It's more than all right. As always, you've done it. You've delivered a lovely, clear presentation. Thank you so much. Thank you very much indeed, Ian. Can we please show our appreciation to Ian for that presentation? Thank you very much indeed. It was very, very big picture, very, very articulate, and very, very interesting. We're going to go straight to Mr. Paul Carlier, who many of you all know. Paul, if you can keep it to within 10 minutes, that would be great. Go over a bit if you need to. If you can keep it to 10, that would be super. After Paul, we're going to have Craig Beavers, Andrew Candy, Stuart Woolard doing short speaking slots, and then we'll throw it open for Q&A. And I think I might well go and have a drink in the meantime. Meanwhile, let's go to Paul Carlier. Paul, over to you, sir. Thank you very much. Thank you.
Thanks, Andy. Thanks, Andy, and thanks to everyone who's already spoken. Before I start, I'd just like to make a couple of points and observations. Chris, what you were talking about earlier, the suicides and everything else. I mean, no remedy, no justice can ever rectify the damage caused by those. But there's another issue that, and I know I'm not alone in this, and you've probably been there, Chris. So many people have been to that dark place, that the verge of that next step, and fortunately not taken that step, but come back from it. But one thing never goes away: the memory of being there. That scar stays forever. So, there's so many more wearing those scars. Another issue is like Mark's talk and all the mention of whistleblowers. I recently took part in a study with the University of Nebraska on whistleblowing, and it was intriguingly titled "Whistleblowers." I think it was modern day heroes. Well, when you think about it, the definition of a whistleblower is somebody who does the right thing. That's all a whistleblower does. They do the right thing. They abide by the regulations. They report wrongdoing. That's the right thing that everyone's supposed to do. What does it say about today's society where whistleblowers are regarded as heroes? People doing the right thing are heroes. I mean, does that not rather sum up the entire culture and the world that we live in? Anyway, if I can, I'm going to try and share my screen. Right, here goes, bear with me. So I'm going to, obviously there's a lot of ground we covered tonight, but my little piece is going to be on FCA redress schemes, which in my opinion, given all I know, they're little more than dishonesty and collusion hiding in plain sight. FCA competence, integrity and honesty has been very much in the spotlight in recent months and years, but perhaps never more so since Dame Gloucester's findings and that of Raj Parker. But something that's often overlooked is that FCA redress schemes create the perception that they are taking action, that the FCA is scoring one for the consumer or the good guys, but sadly the reality tends to be altogether very different. The reality is that the redress scheme is the result when the evidence is so unequivocal that denial is fruitless and would be impossible to justify. It is dishonesty and collusion by the FCA, but hiding in plain sight. The redress becomes the mechanism by which the FCA can next best protect the interests of the firms involved, limit their liabilities and deny consumers appropriate redress. Let me just get to the next slide. So in 8th of November 2016, it's already been mentioned that the FCA publishes their summary of the Promontory report. And it basically makes a raft of claims saying that there was no widespread wrongdoing. But as you'll see there, that the bank, RBS, it accompanied the announcement that RBS would set up a 400 million fund, essentially for things that where they could have done things a little bit better. So and it was accompanied by the same old nonsense that we get time and time again, a canned statement from Ross McEwen, and all the same little things are there. Mistakes, painful experience as a result of the crisis, the financial crisis, the one that they caused, the mention of complex fees, and and then at the bottom there, for businesses that were destroyed, it will be up to the administrators to decide. The administrators that are essentially all panel firms that rely on the banks for their huge fees, all of whom are conflicted, be it Deloitte, KPMG, all Grant Thornton, all of these firms. And it even says that customers who feel they may have lost out will have to fight for redress through the courts. Well, how does a customer that's been financially destroyed do that? So again, another canned response. But these were the summary of the findings. And notice how the FCA, while some isolated examples of poor practice were identified. So it's the same old thing. It's inappropriate, poor practice, misguided, all these kind of things. But the key takeaway here is RBS did not set out to artificially engineer a position to cause or facilitate the transfer of a customer to GRG. Everything you see there was not a widespread practice. There was not a widespread this, or there was not a widespread that. Now, what you have to remember in financial services is that the sole focus is always intent to make financial gain. It's an intriguing word because that is always the intent, and it's obviously a key part of the Fraud Act. But once an objective is established, the consideration of the bank is, can we do it lawfully, or how do we do it to make it appear lawful? And then the third element is, once the bank has established a target, objective or agenda, it will never deviate from that path, even when the legitimate means that they have decided upon have proved unsuccessful. And we see it time and time again with BSU or GRG. Once the legitimate means is evaporating and hasn't worked, perhaps failing to get a customer to sign a personal guarantee, you'd think that would end the pursuit. Well, the fact is that it doesn't. The pursuit never wavers. They simply just then cross whatever lines, breach whatever codes, and broke whatever laws were necessary to achieve their objective. And they knew they could do so because they knew the regulators and law enforcement would have their backs. The FCA had to know that these summary findings were questionable, incorrect, or false. Okay, and let's not forget that when these were published, the FCA by this time had completed multiple investigations into LIBOR, FX, PPI, handling of PPI complaints, and the IRHP sales. And that's just to name but a few. All of these demonstrated exactly that ethos and approach that I described, that basically whatever it takes, we'll do it. and the FCA knew that was a standard modus operandi of all banks. I want to just describe quickly before I move to the next slide, one thing that was written into policy at Lloyd's. I worked in FX. If a customer ever complained about the exchange rate they got on a transaction, it was policy just to deny it. Now, a lot of customers would fall out at that stage. Any customer that refused to accept that, they would then be offered an amount that was equal to 50% of the excessive markup that was taken on the transaction. However, under no circumstances tell the customer that this amount represents 50% of the markup. Just tell them it's a gesture. Furthermore, importantly, the policy said pay the money to the customer as an ex gratia payment, so that he's not in any way linked to the FX transaction and any wrongdoing that might otherwise be applied to it. That was policy. That was not a, oh, let's look at the merits of each case, or that was policy. And it happened in every case. I mentioned the 8th of November. At the time, I was in the middle of an exchange with the Treasury Select Committee on whistleblowing and what I'd discovered and how the FCA and the banks were abusing whistleblowers. And as you can see, this email here is 8th of November 2016 to the Treasury Select Committee, my MP Gareth Johnson, the FCA whistleblower team, and Andrew Bailey, no less, of the FCA. This piece was at the bottom. And, you know, I just read this article and I raised this direct with the TSC and Andrew Bailey on the 8th of November 16. The FCA said there was no wrongdoing on the RBS transfer customers GRG. I mean, seriously, the entire city knows what was going on at RBS in that department, apart from, it seems, the regulator. The email in that article circulated following the Southern Region Managers meeting demonstrates that the FCA conclusion is nothing but another whitewash, presumably made in collusion with the bank so as to protect the bank. I'm guessing that the 400 million fund is part of the deal struck between RBS and the FCA in return for the favourable whitewash. Now, that was the day that announcement came out, and it just so happened that I was writing to the TSC that day. Incidentally, the TSC did nothing on this issue or the whistleblower issue that I was in the process of raising with them. Now, I'm not going to go chapter and verse, but if anybody wants any further information about the GRG and all that was happening, this is the place to go. This is the BuzzFeed website that has a whole cache of leaked documents, and it's an amazing piece of work, and it's got links to all the evidence that various people have brought to attention over the years. So, recommend going there and having a good read. This is one of the key slides. Okay, now this is this shows the P&L of GRG for years 2011 to 2016. Now what you see here is in 2011 they made 1.3 billion pounds profit. Right, that's in one calendar year. Now somebody needs to explain to me how RBS GRG can generate 1.3 billion in profit in 1 year from companies that RBS claim were non-viable, and where RBS was the largest creditor in most, if not all, cases. It's simply not possible. RBS should have lost billions of pounds as a result of these, if these businesses were non-viable, right? But you need to understand that what you see here is a small part of the profit RBS made from the activities by and connected to GRG. Now look at this here, margin enhancements, and this one here, other. Okay, these will likely include profit from sales of products like new or replacement IRHPs, like toxic swaps. The profits that you see reflected here will only be the share of profits enjoyed on this by the GRG unit. They will not include any profit or markup taken by the Treasury or financial markets units that price these products. And typically it's the Treasury and the markets units that will keep the lion's share of any profits. So perhaps treble these numbers and you are closer to a true number. So now consider that if all of these billions of pounds of profits and the substantial profits made elsewhere at RBS were made at the expense of these business customers, how many would have survived but for the making of these huge profits? And importantly, how does GRG make such substantial profits if, as the FCA claimed, there is not a systemic approach and systemic dash for cash as a policy? Let me just move to the next one. Right, this is how the FCA, they made some concessions. And as you can see here, we see again, inappropriate. So the failure to comply with this, the failure to support this, the placing undue focus on pricing increases. Well, this is everything. Pricing increases is the ball game. Everybody, every pricing policy is take up to a maximum of this, do whatever you can on whatever you can get away with basis. But the FCA publishes this list of inappropriate failings, but doesn't stop to consider the aggregation of these inappropriate failings, and doesn't consider that it reflects a policy or systemic intent. Well, these things just happen. These are just you're talking about the most professional people in property, lending and banking, and yet all of these supposedly just random inappropriate things. No, I'm sorry, systemic, and it was policy. Okay, and what you have here is statements made by the FCA that were completely absurd at the time. I knew it, others knew it, absolute joke. However, it was not until I think it was August 2017 when a whistleblower leaked the true promontory report to the BBC, and we were to discover that, hey ho, the FCA knew they'd lied. Loads of people knew they'd lied. The FCA themselves had falsified the outcomes, the summary. Right? It wasn't misleading. They falsified the outcomes. They made false representations in that summary at the same time as presenting this 400 million redress scheme. Again, making it look like, oh, we're doing everyone a favour. Look at this. Here we go. There was just some minor wrongdoing, but look, we've managed to persuade the bank to cough up 400 million. Aren't we the good guys? When we all know that the actual true extent of the damages runs into the billions, if not tens of billions. So, but it's not an isolated case. People have already mentioned the IRHP review. Now, what you have with the IRHP review is a perfect example of the hiding in plain sight, dishonesty inclusion by the FCA. So what you have to remember, before this was announced in 2012, banks and FCA denied mis-selling or fraud in respect to the sale of IRHPs. They'd done it for years. However, media coverage and the weight of complaints eventually forces the FCA into a position where to continue to deny just simply isn't possible. It's just inconceivable to continue denying in the face of all the evidence. So what does the FCA do? They set up the RHP review scheme. Only because they had no choice. But wait, all is not lost for the banks. The FCA can still help them, and they do. So firstly, the FCA engineer the scope of the review with the stakeholders. These are the banks and HM Treasury. We've seen internal correspondence to prove that. They engineer the review in a way so as to exclude the margin credit lines from the scope of the review. They're not in there. These are the hidden, the poison, if you like, that was the cause of so much damage. And yet the FCA exclude them from the scope of the review. We've seen Lloyd's Project Gresham documents, and it lists everything that all the independent reviewers have to look for. They're not there. They simply have excluded them from them. These were FCA regulated products. These were ancillary services as defined by MiFID that were specifically attached to an FCA regulated derivative. They were absolutely, it should have been included within the perimeter and within that review. They were excluded. So, okay, look, job done. We've managed to limit the scope and the liability. However, 6 months in, by December 2012, the banks and the FCA discover that even this is not going to limit the liabilities, such as the foul rate of these IRHP review cases. We understand that by December 2012, the bank's foul rate was 95%. 95%, just stop and consider that. The banks expected the foul rate to be something between 20 and 30%. 6 months in, it was 95%. And I'm told that was a conservative number. So, crap, right, okay. The liability is going to be huge. What are we going to do? So what happens? The FCA and HM Treasury engineer a way to prejudice the scheme and its scope even further in the interests of the banks. Sajid Javid and HM Treasury introduce an entirely new sophistication criteria and force it to be retrospectively applied, eliminating the 5,000 victims with the largest damages, all of whom were always classified as retail or non-sophisticated previously and had been since the inception of their account. So, and then the FCA and HM Treasury would then lie about it for 6 years about why it was introduced and who by. Like literally you've got a step by step by step sequence of events where the FCA has gone to prejudice and protect the liabilities of the banks, and without for 1 second considering that these victims these are the lifeblood of the UK economy, these SMEs. You know, it's staggering. And we understand it was probably 15 billion plus in damages that these 5,000 victims were denied. So my final slide is a similar scheme. I've mentioned this before, you may have seen it. It's a Lloyds mortgage redress scheme set up in 2017, 300 million. And again, looks like the FCA, all, you know, the good guys. Okay. But it seeks to limit the liability of Lloyds to 300 million, when the bank and the FCA knew that true liabilities and damages that customers suffered were substantially higher and almost certainly in excess of 2 billion. Furthermore, they let Lloyds have sole responsibility for determining the redress deserved by each customer. Furthermore, the FCA would wait 3 years until all victims have accepted their paltry compensation before publishing the final notice to Lloyds regarding their investigation that led to the establishment of the redress scheme 3 years earlier. It's just 3 years. They set up the redress scheme, 300 million redress scheme, identifying all these reasons, but they hold on to the final notice for 3 years. How is that even possible? Right, but by then, obviously, all the victims have signed up, taken the compensation, and then you read the report, and it's sickening for all victims because it exposes the fact that the FCA knew before 2013 what was going on, and had people on the ground in the bank investigating in 2013, and in 2013 concluded that there were significant failings. They did nothing, and they didn't say anything. And all the time people are complaining and they're turning these people away. Oh, we don't get involved in individual cases. Yet the FCA knew there was over 500,000 cases. I mean, staggering, dishonest. And how is it not fraud? Right. And look at whose name crops up on here, Jonathan Davidson, you know, recently addressing the Treasury Select Committee, you know, heavily involved and implicated by Dame Gloucester's reporting to LCNF. Right. He was head of supervision at the time they announced the redress scheme, yet makes no mention of the seriousness of it, and his statements to customers here are just sickening. Right, I helped a victim of this, who he attempted suicide. He got into such a dark place. He was offered £400 compensation by this scheme, and yet his damages were 185 grand. They put him through hell for 6 years, and when his issue started, the FCA already knew this was going on. They refused to help him on the individual basis. Okay. And we eventually when he got legal representation, they got the 185 grand in settlement. However, 6 years of damage to a person that had already told the bank 6 years earlier that he was vulnerable, he'd been diagnosed with ME, and he has a heart attack and dies last year. Now, you tell 6 years of stress, everyone will acknowledge stress, you know, is a cause of heart disease and problems. How much did that contribute? And yet here you've got Jonathan Davidson saying, ensuring fair treatment of customers, especially those in financial difficulties or who are vulnerable, is a key priority for the FCA. Garbage. It is sickening garbage. There's nothing sincere about it at all. And all the time he was saying that, he knew the extent of what was going on, and he knew this was little more than a cover-up and a way that the bank could limit the liability. So I'm done. Hopefully that didn't go on for too long. But it's a, you know, for me, this is it. These are the people that are supposed to protect. These are the people you're supposed to go to when you've got a problem with the bank, and this is what you get. You know, it's nothing but fraud and collusion, and it's just hiding in plain sight.
Paul, that was just amazing. I think you will realise I'm a bit kind of dumbstruck tonight. I'm not an unintelligent person. I do understand what's being said, but there's a bit in my brain that just doesn't want to believe it to be true, but I know it to be true. You spend your whole life growing up with a certain idea about the nobility of banks and my word is my bond and all that stuff. And here I am, age 57, thinking I've got it completely wrong for years and years and years. I'm truly shocked. I know I'm not the only one. I've seen notes in the chat from people who are more streetwise than I am, more seasoned than I am, who are shocked at what we've heard tonight. Let's thank Paul for his session, and then we'll move on to our last few speakers. Thank you very much indeed. We will be having a Q&A afterwards. We will have a chance to chat later. I'll keep the channel live for quite a while. I think a lot of people need to talk, frankly. I think we need it. I think we need to talk. Let's go to Mr. Craig Beavers. Craig, thank you for waiting patiently for us. And Craig, please tell us what you'd like to say. Keep it as short as you can. You've got a 1 minute slot. If you need to go over a bit, do it. But please do keep it as short as you can, so that way we can get through yourself, Andy Candy, and Stuart Willard, and then open things up for a broader conversation. Thanks very much. Thank you. Over
Thank
to you.
Craig. Well, for those of you who don't know me, I'm Craig Beavers. I've actually worked with Paul Carlier on a number of these cases, and I've been an expert witness in US courtrooms on some of the LIBOR cases, some of the interest rate hedging cases. And even having done all that, I've got to say, it's still absolutely gobsmacked me to hear the kind of thing that we've heard tonight. It's truly shocking. Just a couple of points that I'd like to make, really. I actually started my career at NatWest back in the early 1990s, and I worked in a group called Trading Risk, which back then calculated these counterparty risk liabilities that many of you've become very painfully aware of. And I just think it's interesting that this isn't a new phenomenon that's happened post the financial crisis. The roots of this go all the way back to the early 1990s. It's probably longer than we've got time to go into tonight, but if any of you are interested, I'd be delighted to share that information with you. Please get in touch with me via the guys. If somebody wants to put my email address up, I'm very happy for it to be circulated among the group. The process obviously changed over time. You know, at some points in time, these things were static. It's been interesting reading the conversation at the side, which I'm sure some of you have. In the early days, it was very much a dynamic process, and an amount was calculated for a swap, which as rates went up and down, varied over time. At other times, it was clearly fixed. You can see that from the history of documents people have. But the common theme all the way through was that this wasn't disclosed to clients. There was a concealed credit line underlaying these swaps. And as people got themselves these products on their balance sheet, on the bank's balance sheet, when the bank wanted to claim the money, these PGs or whatever mechanisms were available to them to make claims on these kind of things. The second point I really wanted to make is from personal experience. Andy's done a great job of pulling together the violation tracker numbers and making the point that, you know, there's more of this in the UK. Paul, I'm sure you can back me up on this. The numbers that you see there are the absolute tip of the iceberg. Most of these cases never see a courtroom. They're settled, and there's been some, you have to give almost grudging respect for the tactics used. You know, I'm aware of one bank, which unfortunately I can't name, who did a deal as part of a settlement that said, well, look, we will give all our data on a particular topic in return for a cap on the amount that can be claimed. And what they did was basically just found every bit of wrongdoing they could possibly find, shoved it all in, because they knew they drew a line under it. And they completely hoodwinked the settlement process. You know, these things just go on, and I could talk about them all night. But really, just to say, for those of you that have got issues with NatWest, I'm very happy to, you know, if you want to talk about stuff that happened back in the 90s, happy to help out if I can. More recently, I'm afraid I don't have personal experience of what went on, but Paul, myself, and there's a couple of other guys on here that have been involved in working as experts on this kind of thing. Have got a lot of experience of what happened.
Craig, thank you very much indeed. I've heard great things about you and your work from various people, and it's
that bit's not true.
It's very good to have you with us tonight. Thank you very much indeed, Craig. We're going to
Delighted to help.
We're going to go straight to Mr. Andy Candy, and then we're going to go to Stuart Willard. Andy, your thoughts, please.
Where do we even begin? God, I'm pretty knackered. I think, like everybody else, is emotionally exhausted, quite frankly. I mean, the depravity and the inhumanity of what has been perpetrated upon the UK by its banking and banks and regulators, and quite frankly, successive governments. I mean, it's truly horrifying. I mean, we've heard you know, a fairly decent set of accounts of that this evening. So I've really got nothing much to add at all. I'd just like, you know, thanks Steve and Chris and Clive and Mark, Ian and Paul and the speakers for doing an excellent job, for fighting the fight, for, you know, continuing doggedly to shed light on these issues and battle on the behalf of victims. And also, quite frankly, Andy, I'd like to thank you and Alexandra and Alex Viley-Winter and the rest of the team for providing such an excellent forum for these, dare I say, evidence sessions. I mean, they're quite frankly as powerful as some of the best Treasury Select sessions I've seen, if not more so. So, you know, it's a public account that's now there for people to see and refer to. And that's extremely valuable. A lot of this in the past has been buried, kicked into the long grass, obfuscated. And I think what you do and what the experts here tonight have done is a testament to getting this dealt with. It's there, it's not going away, we're not going away. And this hopefully provides a forum where, you know, some serious experts can come together and start campaigning to get this dealt with. And I think the efforts of everybody involved is truly admirable. That's all I've got to say.
It's wonderful, wonderful of you to say that. It really is, Andy. Thank you very much, and thank you also, Andy, for volunteering to help TTF the way you have been over the last few weeks. Let's go. Thanks, Andy. Thanks a lot. Let's go straight to Stuart Woolard. Stuart, tell everybody about what you want to say, plus the violation track a bit. Tell them about the advisory board meeting we had earlier today. Tell them what you want. Have a few minutes if you'd like to. Ladies and gentlemen, a lot of you won't know Stuart. He does some amazingly brilliant work with his colleagues in kind of analysing what's really going on in the system. It's absolutely amazing stuff. It really is. Stuart, feel free to whack anything you like into the chat so people can learn a bit more about what you do. And over to you, Stuart. Thank you very much. Thank you.
Thank you, Andy. I mean, thank you for that kind introduction. I'm shell-shocked too. I feel very privileged, actually, to be asked to speak after everybody that spoke this evening. My work, I work for an organisation called the Maturity Institute, and I run a business which is complementary to that. We rate organisational culture, or the human intangibles, and it mirrors a credit rating, actually mirrors the Standard & Poor's credit rating scale. And I guess Andy has asked me to sort of chime in a little bit, because we did a big study on the banks in 2017. We rated the 20 worst performing banks in misconduct terms, of which RBS was one. And you know, I think the first thing I was going to say about it today, Ian talked about the sort of causal factor of why RBS became a toxified culture. You know, that paradigm, that shareholder value, profit maximizing paradigm, is toxified the whole system. And I think many of the speakers have talked about the various actors within the whole system that you know, are not protecting us. They're protecting something. They're protecting a measure of success, which is it's a false one. And you know, with the thing you say, you know, you look at how people have behaved both in RBS and in the FCA and beyond, and what does it say about us? What does it say about what we say about what's good for society and the basis on which we think success is all about? It's shocking. I think the misconduct fines, you know, the tip of the iceberg of the money which has been handed over, but it's the tip of the iceberg of the damage to local communities, to people, to human beings, and you know, the magnitude of that is huge. I mentioned we rated banks. We rated RBS 4 grades below junk status. If you know credit ratings, that's not a great rating. And I think one of the things which has been mentioned is, you know, RBS aren't alone here. You know, you know, HSBC, Lloyds, Barclays were all rated at the similar place, if not worse. And you know, they haven't been serving society at all. They've been serving themselves, and they've got protectors, you know, in regulatory bodies and various other actors in the system. You know, interestingly, Paul mentioned Jonathan Davison. I sat next to Jonathan Davison, Andy, when I stood up at the House of Commons meeting room when we talked about how some years ago how we were trying to fix the financial system. I always wondered why he never came to talk to me afterwards. I kind of know now. You know, the FCA are not in, despite how much they talk about culture and how important culture is, they're certainly not interested in any measurement of it, and particularly in measurements of culture which shed light on why organizations end up behaving the way they do. I don't want to say too much more. I think, you know, everything's been said and more, other than to say, you know, I think you've got the next symposium is on the 27th of April, which is really about the banking sector as a whole and what we can do to fix it.
That's right.
And you use the word radical in that, you know, we do need radical change. We need to change the system, and we need to create. I guess there are shards of light in the system, but they're very, very, you know, narrow ones at this point in time. And let's reconvene on the 27th, where we can have I guess, a more forward-looking, hopefully, and how we fix this. And I hope all the, you know, I've made a contribution tonight to the TTF because you made that contribution, Andy. I think, you know, I hope everyone who is seeking redress and some compensation for what's happened to them receives it, and the more we can work together to create these solutions, the sooner we do that, the better. Thanks.
Thank you, Stuart. Thank you very much indeed. I'm going to say a few more words, folks, and then we're going to open up for general sort of conversation, Q&A. Stuart, you're a very insightful man. You really are, and always great to have you with us. Can we please put our hands together, bang tables, do what you like, to just thank all the speakers. I'm not just saying this. I think you know me well enough to know I haven't got the kind of brain that works in a kind of non-authentic way, but this has just been like, it's been just unbelievable, hasn't it? It really has been unbelievable. Thank you very much indeed. All the speakers prepared really hard, and they all dug deep in terms of their life experiences, and you could see that it's absolutely genuine. It's absolutely true. It's totally and utterly authentic. I want to pick up on a point that Stuart just made about the banking sector as a whole. I'm going to share my screen again. I'm going to go back to Violation Tracker. Stuart, by the way, is on the UK advisory board for Violation Tracker. We've got a great bunch of people working together to make Violation Tracker a success in the UK. And some of you would have seen this, some of you haven't. Just let me just show you the problem we've got. Okay, so you click on industry totals, and for those of you that haven't seen Violation Tracker ever before, what you're looking at is a screen ranking the different industries according to how bad they are, you know, how much they've been fined by different authorities in the USA. And look at financial services. It's on the top of that list. Now, I've said this point before, and I'm going to repeat it. There's a very strong logical argument to say that the financial services sector should be nowhere near the top of a bad list. Yeah, a Syndex, as I like to call it. This is a Syndex, an index of sins, yeah? Financial services should not be anywhere near the top of that. And the reason is because the entire financial services industry is built on the idea that it could be trusted. The word credit comes from the Latin word credere, which means the belief in. If you take trust out of financial services, you've got nothing left. And here the evidence is telling us that it's actually the least trustworthy of all industries, the most fined. Not only is it the worst, look at how much it's the worst by. It's so far ahead of number 2, pharmaceuticals. And by the way, that's even taking into account the opioid crisis and all the dodgy stuff the pharmaceuticals industry has been doing. And pharmaceuticals is on top of oil and gas. And that's even after the oil slicks in Mexico. So how bad is financial services? I'll tell you, it's really, really bad. It's so bad, there should be Senate meetings every week until the problem's sorted out, because society simply cannot function successfully unless we have a financial industry that is at least trustworthy, and it isn't. And that's why we need to continue to shine a big bright light on these issues. That's why Violation Track is coming to the UK. That's why on the 27th of April, we've got our event about the case for radical reform of the banking sector. This is really, really important stuff, folks. It really is. We've still got, I mean, it's unbelievable. We've still got 66 people with us, and it's 20 to 9. And a lot of you haven't had your tea yet. I know I haven't, but I'm good for going. So let's, we're going to formally end the session now, but we're going to carry on recording it. So be aware, we're carrying on recordings. Only say what you want to say. What I'm going to try and do is facilitate a Q&A kind of session. So please let me know if you'd like to say something. I ask everybody to provide short questions and comments and short responses as appropriate. I'll chair this. We'll try to bring it to life. We're going to go to Mark Bishop first and then to Anne-Marie Borg. Please raise your hand digitally if you know how to, or just wave at me if you don't. But one way or another, we'll get around as best as we can. We're going to go Mark, Anne-Marie, then Eva. Mr. Mark Bishop, over to you, sir. Thank you.
So I think it's been amazing, some fantastic presentations, compelling evidence. And really the question I have, which can go to any or all of the people who presented, is how do you think we can get to a situation where government, particularly Treasury and the banks and the FCA, are prepared to come to the table and talk? Because in essence, the more you accuse them of stuff, the risk is the more that they're going to retreat into their shells and deny everything. The way to get this resolved may be to actually extend a hand of friendship and compromise and say, we know that you've done some very bad things. We know that many of you are criminals, but we are prepared to forget all of that. If you pay the victims compensation, the bad guys leave the industry and the regulator, and you agree to meaningful reform. I think that's the only way they're going to get away from an adversarial situation in which they keep denying everything. But how do you get to them to that table and to genuinely go forward with reform?
Mark, thank you so much for setting such a beautiful question at this point. I see Paul Carlier is keen to chip in, and then we'll go to any of the other speakers who'd like to respond to that. Mr. Carlier, over to you.
Well, funnily enough, we recently put to Robin Budenberg of Lloyd's, the new incoming chairman, and we copied the SFO in on the email. I don't mind. I mean, everyone knows now that the case in question is being investigated by the SFO. We've put Budenberg into a position where we've given him all of the evidence, so he's personally culpable. And I suggested, that the only solution to this was some kind of deferred prosecution agreement whereby Lloyd's would agree to compensate victims, provide some kind of measured redress and a scheduled means of redress, so that the banking system and the bank itself isn't damaged. There's no, if the bank that owes you money is destroyed, there's no, it's a lose-lose. So, in my opinion, that is the way forward. As Mark says, it's you're taking a step back from prosecution and combat, and you're saying, right, okay, look, we'll agree to a deferred prosecution agreement here if the bank steps up and says, right, we will enter into a measured, fair redress scheme, but that does accept all of the damages, including consequential damages, and people will be prepared to take a period of time to have that money repaid to them. I think that's the only way forward.
Could I just thank Mark for putting such a brilliant point to us, and Paul for your wise response. Mark, you do so much for TTF already, I know that, but you've got a particular type of mind that works in a particular type of way, and I need to sort of harness that power. Would you mind, over the next few days, putting together an A4 piece of paper, setting out the idea you just spoke about, this kind of truth and reconciliation, let's draw a line in the sand approach, because I think it could be, I think it could be a game changer, because from my point of view, the amount of evidence everyone's got is just irrefutably convincing. Any sane human being who would watch tonight's session with an objective, open mind would come to the same conclusion: the system's rotten. The system's rotten, and the fish rots. The fish rots from the head. So something serious needs to happen. There needs to be, forgive the horrible language, a lancing of the boil type process to get it all out so we can move forward and clean up the system. Please do that for me, Mark, if you don't mind. Thank you very much.
Andy, I would be honoured to do that. I mean, my very initial reaction would be, we could do a lot worse than send Nikhil Rati the link to this video.
Yeah, we will. We will. We will.
And say to him, look, do you want to come and have a chat? Very happy to do it behind closed doors on a without prejudice basis. But, you know, essentially, you know, we are not going anywhere.
Yeah.
We really are not. We're going to nail a lot of you if we have to. But what we much prefer to do is to recognise that the past is the past, put things right, and move forward consensually.
Thank you, Mark. This video is not just going to go to Nick Arati or Charles Randell, the chairman of the FCA. It's going to the Prime Minister. I'm trying to figure out if there's a way of getting hold of the Queen's email address. Our country, I'm serious by the way, our country needs this sorted. You know, our country needs this sorted. It needs this toxic situation sorted. And I'm just going to keep hollering all the way to the top. As high as we need to go until eventually we find somebody somewhere that's going to listen. Thank you very much indeed, Mark. Thank you. And Paul.
I wanted to come back on regarding the Broomhead bankruptcy. And of course, the bankruptcy court is used to stop people from being able to carry on in court proceedings. Because when a person is in bankruptcy or becomes bankrupt, they lose what they call the locus standa in court, which means to say they can't do anything else in the course and become a non-person. So this is a weapon that's used quite a lot for that particular reason. And it has been a very emotional and time tonight, and I thank all the speakers. Unfortunately, we spent 20 years in the courts with these matters, and we were evicted by violence from our home by the RBS on the 6th of November 2002. And it actually, they stole my husband's life works at that time. They inflicted enormous damage on our family and my children, my 2 sons, and that actually ruined our family life, obviously. And the thing at the bottom of all this is that the bank, the RBS, they admitted in affidavit that they couldn't prove the alleged debt, but they still went ahead and took everything from us and put us in the street, and we were absolutely penniless. And during the time when my husband was dying at home, I can't really talk about it. It was so horrendous what they did to us. By process service, faxes, everything, trying to force my husband into court when he was dying from terminal brain cancer and couldn't move, couldn't see, couldn't speak, couldn't do anything. And he was a sole defendant. And then it started on me after my husband died. But anyhow, you've heard what they were able to do, and it's basically based on cruelty, total ruthlessness, and depravity. And these people, I'm afraid I can't say that I consider them to be human, because a human person doesn't act like this. This is a completely different set of persons or whatever, individuals or things. Things is probably the better description of them. Yeah.
Eva, thank you. I don't know what to say.
Well, it was hell, absolute hell, like other people have gone through. Absolute hell.
Eva, thank you for sharing this. I don't know what we're going to do, but let's just try doing whatever we can. And if enough of us stick together, I mean, I'm quite literally up for getting in front of Parliament with a placard saying the banking system is rotten and needs sorting out. Let's march. Let's do whatever we need to do to do what we can to get listened to. I'm up for doing anything. If it's just about sane and legal, let's do it. Let's do it.
But don't rely. Can I just say this as a last thing? Do not rely on the courts. Now, I'm not saying that all judges are bad. I'm not saying that by any means, but do not rely on the court for justice.
It's a very astute point you made. One of the points made at a recent event, I can't remember which one, my mind's all a bit blurry. Basically, the legal system in the UK is so contaminated with conflicts of interest because all the big law firms work for all the big banks. It's probably going to take a non-UK law firm or cluster of agents for change outside the UK to try to make something happen. That's kind of where my little brain's going. Paul Bates is with us tonight. I think Paul's still here. Paul, if you are, after Nicholas Wilson has spoken, please share with everybody your thoughts about this kind of idea of we need a proper class action system and so on. Nicholas Wilson, over to you, please. Nicholas, to you. Thank you.
This is a bit left field, but it is an example of what we're all up against. And everybody knows my bugbear is HSBC. Ian Fraser earlier exhibited that Venn diagram, which purported to show the origins of the banking crisis. And I looked at it for a while and I couldn't believe that HSBC was missing. The banking crisis started with HSBC's purchase of HFC Bank in America. It legitimized subprime lending. That was the cause of the banking crisis and their profit warning in February 2006. So I looked at that. It was published by the Financial Times and I couldn't understand why HSBC were not there. So I've just done a little bit of digging whilst trying to listen to other people. At the time that was published, Rona Fairhead was CEO of the Financial Times. She was also a non-executive director of HSBC.
Oh, God.
And then she came on to be the chair of the BBC. That is what we never hear about HSBC at any of these seminars because they don't exist. Andy Candy has been a victim, but beyond that, they didn't do IHRP. They didn't have a recovery unit. They're squeaky clean. It's nonsense, and that's what we're up against. That's my bit. And I'll come off now.
Thank you, Nicholas. What you just said is really interesting. I'm sharing my screen again. So what you're looking at, folks, is the worst offending organisations in America. So these are the fines by American entities against financial services sectors, and basically you'll see lots of big names and lots and lots and lots of big names and lots and lots and lots of big names. And if you want to look at what HSBC has actually done, we can go to the search engine, and we go here and we put in the name HSBC. I think it comes up as HSBC. Yeah, here it is. So here's HSBC. This is against the US entities, where I imagine they have, I'm going to choose my words very carefully, where I imagine they are likely to have less influence. So this is HSBC, $6.5 billion worth of fines, HSBC against American institutions. And these are all the things they've been doing that are naughty: anti-money laundering deficiencies, toxic securities abuses, fraud. Interesting word, fraud. Repeat that, fraud. Republic New York Securities, owned by part of the HSBC group. Banking violations, mortgage abuses, economic sanction violations, interest rate benchmark manipulation, etc., etc., etc. So maybe HSBC isn't quite as squeaky clean as some in the UK might suggest. Fascinating, Nicholas, absolutely fascinating. Please, I'm going to go to gallery mode so I can see everybody. Mr. Paul Bates, if you're with us, Paul, please introduce yourself and just share your thoughts. I know you've missed most of the session, but in all honesty, Paul, you're going to want to watch the replay, so to speak. Paul, tell us about yourself and give us your thoughts about the challenges of getting justice in the UK. Let's go from there. Thank you.
Well, yes, thank you very much, Andy. I was able to absorb most of the session, but I want to certainly reread the slides. I'll say 30 seconds about access to justice and 30 seconds about alternatives. The UK legal system, from what I've seen of it, is pretty pro-bank, pro-financial institution, especially in London. And I have impressions of this after practicing almost 40 years in Canada and recently getting qualified in the UK in the hopes of mounting the colossal group and class actions I do here in Canada. So I think there needs to be a litigation strategy derived from these very sound and thoughtful inputs that pick off winning points and start to advocate them in good venues. In Canada, for example, we would look at things like a good faith obligation to perform credit agreements, which is arguable now in Canada. a reasonable notice obligation before terminating on-demand credit agreements. Forged signatures would be a wonderful basis in Canada for a fraud action, conspiracy claims, etc. So that's the way my mind's starting to process all of this. In answer to your question, Andy, about group actions, in the UK, they're just feeble. I don't like them. In Canada, the US, we do wonderful reforms by identifying a representative plaintiff and bring class actions. And I think that needs to get enacted in the UK. And I know, Andy, you're alert to that. And I hope it's done before the sunset on my career, because it's a wonderful way. It levels the playing field. It puts terrible pressure on financial institutions. And coupled with class action procedure in Canada and sometimes in the US, we allege regulatory failure, which is a clever thing. I swear I thought of it. Judges love it. The minute they think the banks and financial institutions are offside regulation, the equities shift and they're against the banks, and now they're in favor of the financial institutions, and they don't care what regulatory excuses are given. So anyway, there's a whole way to try to develop all of this. Those are my 30 seconds. But in terms of non-litigation strategies and regulatory reform efforts, I think you have a great momentum there. You're doing well. Keep it going. You've got members of the Labour Party in Parliament interested in what you're doing. I think that's an excellence of the TTF. So enough for me. I wish I could have listened only to this. I was on 3 Zooms concurrently today, but that won't be the case every day. Thank you so much, Andy. Well done.
Thank you very much, Paul. From one Paul to another. Paul Carlier, please. Thank you.
Yeah, I mean, I'd like to echo just what Paul said. I mean, I've worked on 6 different class actions now, but all of them across the world. One in Canada, several in the US, a couple in Asia, but we can't get I think the total settlements are over $5.5 billion on a variety of asset classes. We can't get a dime of work in the UK. Class actions. We actually put a class action on IRHPs to a litigation funder, and the question was, who is the respondent? Who's the defendant? Is it the FCA? Is it the banks? Is it the Treasury? Because where do you start? I mean, we've got absolute case, I think, for the 5,000 victims that were excluded via that retrospective sophistication criteria. Oh, it's a slam dunk, right? We've got evidence to prove that they were lied to. They were, it was entirely misleading, and they were let down. They've got a case, but who do you go against? I mean, it is the we've been trying to get a car finance group litigation order off the ground. We've got all the evidence, but trying to get the funders and the lawyers to progress it. I mean, we've got everything. I mean, I gave all my evidence to the FCA in 2016. That's what prompted the investigation that produced this notice to say that victims were being stung to the tune of 300 million a year, which, by the way, 300 million a year, try 5 billion a year. We've done the math. It's 5 billion a year that the car finance victims were suffering. And yet we can't get the bloody thing progressed. I mean, it's just insane.
Maybe we should talk, Paul. I'm empathetic to that. There are gaps in Canadian legislation, and where you cannot bring a class proceeding, you crowd the court. You file hundreds of individual actions, and all of a sudden now you have the sympathy of the judiciary, and they may try to help the claimants. But I'm sorry, I'm going to have to apologize for interrupting you. We should talk. You need more creative thinking.
Yeah, 100%.
Thank you.
Andy, Claire here in Dublin, I don't seem to be able to get your attention. When you get a moment, would you put me on, please?
Claire, we would love to hear from you right now. My apologies if you didn't have a chance to speak earlier. And I can see that Wendy Bishop seems to want to say something as well. So we're going to go to Claire, then we're going to go to Wendy. And forgive me, ladies, if I have accidentally not noticed you. Claire, please do tell us who you are, where you are, and what you'd like to say. Thank you, Claire.
My name is Claire Leonard. I'm in Dublin, the Republic of Ireland. And 43 billion, anything I say, I have the proof of, okay?
Right.
43 billion of assets in Ireland were allocated in December 08 for liquidation to support the balance sheet of RBS. They have documented it in this document, which you can no longer get on the internet. This document is called RBS Consistent Progress Q2 2011 Fixed Income Presentation. If anyone wants it, I have a copy of it. Right, under measurable balance sheet strengthening, they don't hide what they're doing. This page reads, continuing to reduce usage of short-term wholesale funding. Non-core reduction lessens market funding requirement. And here we have the 43 billion that they started out with. In 2013, they were down to 29 billion. I have the evidence that I was part of the 29 billion. There's no mystery here. They're actually quite open about what they were doing. They were strengthening the RBS balance sheet, and everything is in this document. If anyone wants it, they're welcome to have it, right? 43 billion of assets liquidated in Ireland out of a population of 5 million. Now, olive branches, I'll tell you what, after what I've been through, they can shove their olive branches. This is no longer about money. I have noticed that the senior staff have indemnity within the corporations they work for. Yeah. When Ulster Bank goes, the senior members of staff who set up RGS, who destroyed people's lives, who have over 1,000 people who have committed suicide, have no indemnity. So my suggestion is we go for corporate manslaughter. I've had enough, quite frankly.
Claire, thank you for making your point so brilliantly. I don't really know what to say, but that was paradigm
there is
shifting.
Case law in relation to corporate manslaughter. French Telecom wanted to reduce their staff, and they bullied the staff, and they had several suicides as a result.
I heard this.
Are you familiar with that?
I've heard this, yes.
So there is case law in this regard. Now, if the staff realise that they've no immunity, and I hope some of the staff of RBS or Ulster Bank are listening, you realise you've no immunity once you close down Ulster Bank. You're a sitting duck, aren't you? So you better start squawking and tell the truth.
Thank you, Claire.
I'm sorry, I'm not very pleasant tonight.
Claire, pleasant or not, you are purposeful and you are truthful and you're speaking from the heart.
I've had enough.
And that's what we do. Bless you, Claire. Absolutely bless you, Claire. Alexandra, can you please fix up a conversation for me and Claire? We'll talk, Claire, and see what we can do to try to help. We're going to go from Claire to Wendy Bishop. Wendy Bishop's another new TGF member, I think.
Andy, can I butt in after Claire as well?
Yeah, of course you can. Yeah, of course you can. Forgive me. Yeah, of course you can. Thank you. Go for it, please, Wendy. Thank you.
Hi, my name's Wendy Bishop. I'm a publican. I'm a landlady in a pub in Devon, in the UK. We are or were with NatWest Bank. When the recession hit, because NatWest classed all pubs as an increased risk, we got put into GRG, unreally beknownst to us. 10 years of no sleep, 10 years of stress. My husband had a massive heart attack. I've got 8 brain aneurysms, which the doctors say is caused by stress and high blood pressure. I've had 1 operated on and I've got 7 left. What annoys me is these banks can get away with murder. Apparently the FCA is taking NatWest to court for laundering money. One man in particular paying £1 million a day over the counter into NatWest, which they didn't even look at. The FCA already have said that they will not prosecute one person in particular, but they're going to take the bank to court. What's also scared me tonight is I have learned that Nathan Bostock has gone to Santander And that is what I've changed our business account to. I just beside myself. I mean, luckily we were able to, in the end, pay off NatWest. But for the last bit of it, they were ringing me every day, telling me to sell the pub, drop the price, sell it, sell it. But luckily we paid off the last bit of the loan for it. But there's got to be some redress to these people. And I think the more, I've only heard about you today, yesterday, I think it was, whenever I registered. But I think more people need to be aware of it, we need to spread the word. I will sort of somehow either make a donation to the other one a bit later on, but I'm seeing you on my phone. But I tell you what, I am Taurian. I am stubborn, and I put up a really good fight.
Good on you. Good on you, Wendy. I admire you. I admire your soul. Yes, well done. Well done. Well done. Well done. Well done. Wendy and Devon. Maybe when lockdown's over, we can all buy a pint in your pub, Wendy. Maybe that would be nice.
The first one will be on me.
Good on you, Wendy. We're going to go to Roger. Roger, please introduce yourself and share with us what you'd like to say. Thank you, Roger.
Yeah, hi. My name's Roger Lewis. I'm calling from Sweden, my house in Sweden,
Wow.
but I'm a British citizen, and I've had businesses in the UK for the last 30 years. I'm actually in business with Julia Davey, who some of you may know.
Yeah.
It was Paul's point, which I wanted to, Paul Carlier's, who I watched his excellent talk a couple of weeks ago, and I must say I've been blown away by this sort of body of information, which is quite important. But one point that Paul made was in terms of, extending a hand of friendship to the banks. And also Mark made the same point. Now, in dispute resolution, one must be grown up and what have you, but the banks fight dirty, and there's no point pretending they don't. And the point I particularly wanted to bring up was, well, no one wants the bank to go bust, because if the bank owes you money and they've gone bust, who pays the money? Now, that's a really important question, and it goes to the core of this whole discussion. In the last year, the central bank money, central bank's balance sheets have more or less doubled across the world, from 12 trillion to 24 trillion.
Wow.
Right. So if you consider, if that was a company and we were all shareholders in that company, we've been diluted 50%. It's more than that, because it obviously spins up from that because of the money multiplier. Now, a lot of people, like my case, goes back to 2011. So, if I ever get anything back off Clydesdale Bank, it certainly won't be adjusted for dilution. In terms of money 10 years ago, it is worth, at least half as much as money is now. And that's because of the amount of new money that's coming into the economy. And the process which the banks have been engaging in, not just for the last 5 or 10 years, not just since 2008. I've seen successive friends and friends of the family lose their businesses in this cyclical economy. And what happens is the recession comes along, and then the banks basically have dibs on what they perceive to be the weaker hands, and the weaker hands they're able to force because the arcana of the law is founded on precedents which have actually developed over the last century or so. Now, it was Lord Acton that said that the battle coming down the ages is the battle between the people and the banks. Now, Lord Acton actually said that, it's quite true. I call 2008 peak ignorance of monetary history. With the rise of credit cards, the waning of cash, we've forgotten about, what money is. And so whilst we've all suffered with fraudulent activity from the banks, I would ask people just to consider what the redress is. So if the bank has gone bust, the banking system Obviously, you have the Bank of England, then you have the commercial banks, then you have the retail banks, then you have the licensed deposit taking and people who make loans. You have people who originate credit, and you have people who raise credit in the secondary markets. And that, you know, Northern Rock, for instance, wasn't a bank; it had depositors, but it borrowed short and lent long, and that's what caused the problem with Northern Rock. Now, we had another gentleman talking about, you know, the financial crisis starting with HSBC and their purchase in 2016. Well, it's a very complex problem. There are quite a few variables in all of this, but what we have to understand is it's a financial system and a system of credit which actually revolves around the dollar, really, and the federal bank. You know, the bankers operate on a first of money equal sort of process. So ourselves, we are undoubtedly up against a very powerful enemy.
Roger,
and they are an enemy.
Roger, forgive me interrupting you, because it's getting on a little bit, and a lot of us are quite tired, and you're taking us into a very interesting and very legitimate area, but it might be a bit too kind of complex for now. But
Can I
thank
wrap
you.
up just in 30 seconds?
Yeah, please do.
Just
Please
say
go for it, Roger.
that,
Thank you.
in terms of a one-on-one, I think we need a theory group to go for the banking theory. One of my great friends is Professor Richard Werner. He's the leading academic on basically monetary history, credit, etc. I was speaking to Richard earlier. I'm sure he would love to come and speak. But there are weaknesses in our foe, and we must exploit them. And the way to do that is to collate information in forums like this, and then also have a brains trust, a fighting wing, if you like, and we have to fight it as if we're going to war with this enemy. Now, obviously, we play by the rules. We know they won't, but I really do think that we have to get our ducks in a row in terms of what we're dealing with, because the banks are playing poker and we're all playing snap.
I understand.
So let's figure out the game we're playing.
Andy, can I just respond on one of the points that Roger raised there very, very quickly?
You can go for it. Thank you.
Thank you, Roger. I absolutely take your point. You know, that the banks are there to provide a social good, and if we didn't have banks, there would be all sorts of problems. But we need to be extremely careful with that point, because it is used by the banks extensively to create a shield around themselves. This kind of, oh, we're too big to fail, and if we go, then it's all going to be terrible. You know, there are a lot of people on this call and on a lot of other things that have been very badly wronged. That's one of the bank's planks that they rely on. It's used again and again, and Paul will tell you the same thing. We've both heard it in courtrooms. You know,
I accept the point. I'm not anti-bank, but I am anti-criminality.
Yeah.
Also, revolving door, and I'm a capitalist. I'm not a crony capitalist.
Thank you.
Comment.
Well, just for a point of interest, we know and rate Richard Werner. He spoke at one of our events about a year ago. He's a good guy, and he knows the monetary system very, very well, and he's really clued into the shenanigans that go on within central banks in particular, and I get his vibe very well, Roger. Thank you for introducing yourself, Roger, and telling us all about your thoughts. My colleague Alexander is going to try and fix up a call for us. Does anybody else have anything they'd like to say? We're kind of on what I think might be the home straight. It's been an incredible session. We're going to go to Jess. I can see Jess has got his hand up. Jess, to you, please. Let's try and keep it short and sweet, folks, because a lot of us are quite tired. Thank you.
Yeah. Thanks, Andy. I kind of just absolutely want to take on kind of so many points that have been made today. And I think one of the key things in Britain, as opposed to places like US and Canada, is we have a system of the elite and the working class. Okay, there is this, and we can't kind of shy away from that. And I think a lot of the banks and the ecosystem has absolutely asset stripped a lot of people. And I think these sort of forums are brilliant, because I think what we've really got to do is start. Roger's point is right, which is, I think I don't think it's time for any sort of like trying to find solutions. I think the language these banks and insolvency practitioners and lawyers, the whole ecosystem, have taken people's wealth, and they have actually destroyed and killed people. I think there was a lady who mentioned about corporate murder. Absolutely right. But we have to, as a group, collectively get together with a strategy of which I think there is absolutely mileage in class lawsuit actions. The fact that it has not been as developed in other countries doesn't mean that it will not be developing. And this TTF forum will be the continual process of it to be developing, because we have to talk their language, which is they took your money. That's really in effect what they've done, and you're like, and you've got to counter it with that. Otherwise, this is always going to be a David Goliath battle. And so just last 10 seconds, Andy. And in terms of the TTF, I think, and this is just as a bit of whiteboard thinking, the TTF's strategy, in my view, can be really added with a kind of a parallel process. One is the legislative change, which is absolutely, gathering momentum with our connections in the House of Lords and the political. And it's a long road, but the more people we have doing that, the better, because there has to be legislative changes in, say, the Insolvency Act, which is 40 years old. And I think a lady mentioned that there's a lot of people in this forum, as soon as you are made bankrupt, that's it. Your human rights have gone. That is just absolutely unacceptable in this day and age. And the second parallel route is litigation. And litigation, of course, is more of a commercial business. Me being a chartered accountant, and I grow businesses for a living, and I spend a lot of time in the advertising PR world. What happens with that litigation class lawsuit actions from high scale to low scale is the opportunity for us to really showcase the work of TTF through documentaries, through social media, and for the TTF in a way to be compensated, which will improve the cash flow for TTF as well, to be a much bigger organization than what it is. Because I think that litigation route is something I would really encourage all of us to collectively kind of make this effort and skill sets that we've got here to really kind of ensure that we have a commercial litigation arm running in parallel with a legislative change arm at the same time. So I just wanted to just add that. Thank you very much. And it's brutal out there, and it's horrible. And some of the stories that I've heard have just been just absolutely distressing. And we've got to do it for everybody who's lost their lives. We've got to do it for people to prevent this happening in the future, and we've really got to do it, all of us together. I don't want to be, and none of us want to be here in 10 years time and thinking, okay, you know what, we might have had a couple of wins. No, this needs absolute wholesale change, and we've got to, but I think we do have to have a fighting spirit, because this is the only language they understand, right? I think somebody mentioned the 11-year-old and 6-year-old. What's the one thing you're going to say to the 6-year-old? You've got to stand up to the bully, right? And you've got to fight, and that's where we be. So thank you very much. Thank you.
That's right. It's interesting you say this, Jess. I was brought up with the idea that you must always fight back, because if you fight back, it reduces the chance of that bully picking on somebody else in the future. So you're not fighting for yourself, you're fighting for the next little guy, in the knowledge that if somebody else has smacked that bully in the nose the week before, he might not have picked on you. That's the point you're making. There's real wisdom in that. I'm absolutely sure. That's why we must fight back. We must fight back. I've just put a note in the chat. It says, please email alex.zitkus@transparencytaskforce.org if you want a free, I didn't mention free, but it is a free place, a meeting we've got on the 21st of April. It's actually a very special meeting. I'll need to explain why it's a special meeting. It's a special meeting about gathering evidence on the FCA itself. And the call for evidence is coming from this entity. Some of you won't know this, but the Transparency Task Force is the secretariat to 2 all-party parliamentary groups. For those of you outside the UK, an all-party parliamentary group is where a group of politicians agree to work together despite the fact that they have very different political views. So one of the things the all-party parliamentary group does is it focuses on how to change the system. That's why we are the secretariat to it. That's why we helped create this. And you'll see it has a purpose statement there. And the purpose statement talks about, as you can see, it's not just service providers or regulators that have not delivered. So just to explain my point a bit more clearly, I'm mumbling some time. The all-party parliamentary group on personal banking and fairer financial services has an agenda, which is to gather evidence on the FCA. These are the politicians involved with it. There's quite a few. We've been involved with this from the beginning. We're very proud to be involved with it. It's one of our strategies for driving change, is just to get basically engage with politicians, etc., etc. And the Transparency Task Force is the secretariat to it. There's me looking a bit smarter than I do right now, with various other folks, Mark Bishop, Sue Lewis, and he now knows I'm showing this. There's Mr. Richard Emery, who's a man I rate very, very highly. And it was Richard's hand up just a moment ago that inspired me to make this point. So Richard, that's the best ever queuing ever to you. Richard, please introduce yourself and share your thoughts. Thank you.
Thank you, Andy. Professionally, I assist individuals who have been the victims of bank fraud, primarily authorised push payment fraud, and help them to challenge the banks, take cases to the Financial Ombudsman Service, challenge the regulators. I've been involved in things like the development of pushing the banks to introduce confirmation of payee, which is still only a tiny solution to a very big problem. But I just wanted to just add very briefly a couple of comments to what I have to say. I knew the situation was bad. I had no idea of the level of criminal wickedness that has been going on, and I just applaud the guys and girls who have been speaking, and my heart goes out to them, and I'll come back to something about that in a moment. But let me just say this: the leopards have not changed their spots. So I'll just say this, that of the cases that I'm looking at the moment, NatWest and Santander, an interesting link there to Nathan Bostock, come out as those banks that are most complained about, those banks that are failing to reimburse victims when they should be. In each case, I have in excess of £1 million of disputes involving those banks. Particularly in relation to NatWest and some cases I'm dealing with them, they are masters of obfuscation and obscurity. They will very happily misrepresent the truth, and they consistently fail to comply with their legal obligations. So the problems that people are talking about in the past are still problems that are embedded in the bank today, and it does appear to be an ongoing culture. What I would say, and the reason why I mention a little bit of knowledge that I had from the past, is that I was privileged to attend the Houses of Parliament on the 10th of May 2018, where there was a debate on banking misconduct and the FCA, and that really was a parliamentary debate about RBS and the Global Restructuring Group. And I would say that if anybody wants to engage with a list of MPs who may be interested, over and above the ones that we already work with, like Peter Gibson and the All-Party Parliamentary Group, go to Hansard for the 10th of May 2018, and you will see there a list of MPs, many of whom were recording the deaths of members of their constituency as a result of RBS Global Restructuring Group. So that's just a short contribution, which I hope is helpful. But Andy, absolutely brilliant event. We really have got an uphill task, but Andy knows I am absolutely supporting everything that's going on here.
Yeah, thank you very much. And it's wonderful having Richard involved, because he really, 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 really knows his stuff, particularly around banking related fraud. We're going to go to Clive. Richard, do me a favour. Can you put into the chat the date of that Hansard? We'll dig it out and we'll circulate it. A lot of people will be very interested in that. And if we can, we'll find the Parliament TV on it as well. Just let us have the date and whether it is in the Commons or in the Lords. Thank you very much, Richard. Mr. Clive May, to you, please, sir. Thank you. Clive, you're on mute. Go for it, son.
Can you hear me now, Andy?
Yeah, we can.
So just touching on the FCA, in order for a bank to get the EFG guarantee, I had to complete an asset and liability statement. I sent it to the bank and they confirmed receipt. A few days later, the bank manager is ringing me up, telling me to delete the email containing the asset and liability statement and send a new one, minus the second property I put on it. The reason they did that was, if we had assets, they wouldn't be able to obtain a government guarantee. They use the EFG to repay off the overdraft.
Oh, God.
So what the bank did then was, they sent a letter saying the asset you refer to, your RM asking you to delete from your asset and liability statement, was in fact held in the name of your wife due to the death of one of her relatives. Nobody had died, they made that up. The next letter that came out said, the RM didn't believe the property was solely owned by me, and now it was an investment property. I take those two letters to Andrew Bailey direct, because he was dealing with my case through Mark Wright. Andrew Bailey responded by saying, perhaps your file got mixed up with somebody else's. So you've got the bank inventing a death as a reason why they're asking me to, basically, they're asking me to commit fraud. Then they're saying it's an investment property. Instead of the CEO of the FCA saying, this is wrong and needs looking at, his response is, your file got mixed up with somebody else's. Nothing to see here, clear off. You know, that is the state of the FCA. That's the CEO of the FCA. And he's been heavily involved in mine and Mark Wright's cases. Right up until, I mean, I can email Andrew Bailey at the Bank of England, and within 10, 15 minutes, even beginning of this week, he'll still send read receipts, because he's obviously bothered about something with the brickie from North Wales. But it's a disgrace. It's a disgrace where they can, you know, what bank invents a death in somebody's family? We've heard about suicides. We've heard about sending victory emails. They're inventing deaths. I mean, one thing that Mark come across, and it hasn't come out today, is another scandal that RBS did. Staff in branches were trawling local obituaries. If any of their bank customers had died, staff were routinely upgrading their accounts to a packaged bank account. They'd leave it after 28 days. They would then write to the bank and say, this person's died. The reason they did that was they had to leave it for 28 days because if anyone complained, they wouldn't be able to get the bonus for the packaged bank account. There's an obsession with RBS about death, about end of life. For whatever reason they do it, this bank that sends out victory emails is, well, what can you say? You know, me, Neil Mitchell and Bill Esterton appeared on the Victoria Derbyshire show. And we were talking about the criminal element of RBS at the time. My case was being investigated by North Wales Police. But I started speaking about the victory emails, and Mark said about it. I was contacted on Twitter by a person who said, and upset.
Take your time, Clive. It'll be good for you to get it out. Take your time, mate. Take your time.
It still upsets me today, where that person said his friend committed suicide at Christmas. He left too young. He left two young daughters, you know, and they were sending out victory emails. I brought that to a bloke called John Sutherland at the FCA, who works at the PRA and the Bank of England. He was Bailey's right-hand man. When I brought this to his attention, he said, you've been warned about your behaviour in the past. That's the FCA for you, the Bank of England, the PRA. You know, how can we fight people like that? We get minor victories, but, you know, when people are committing suicide over the bank's actions, you're getting warned when you bring it to their attention about your behaviour. There's something fundamentally wrong. So, yeah, sorry about that.
Don't you dare apologise. You're speaking from your heart. This isn't a pitch for our book, so let me just make that point first of all, okay? But we published a book last year about the need for reform of the financial sector. I don't know if you can see it. On the inside front cover, and you probably can't see this either, but I will show you. And I chose these words very carefully. On the inside front cover, it says, "This book is dedicated to the memory of the 10,000 plus people who have committed such suicide as a consequence of malpractice, malfeasance, misconduct and mis-selling by the financial services sector." 10,000 people. And I'm not making that number up. That's evidence from, it's evidence by Oxford University, recorded in a medical journal about depression and suicide. People who typically, because of the global financial crisis, they lost their jobs. Because they lost their jobs, their houses were repossessed. That led to family breakups. Family breakups led to suicide. I'll put a link to the evidence in a minute in the chat when I get my head straight. And you read a figure like 10,000 suicides, and it's just like too horrible for your brain to really absorb it, isn't it?
Yeah.
You know, and then you think about one, yeah, the poor soul that Clive May just spoke about, and you think that times 10,000, you know.
Yeah, but Andy, no one knows about it. It's not getting out there. We've got to take an absolute kind of push out on what we're doing with the documentary, the social media. These are absolutely brilliant. Sorry, Nigel, didn't mean to bump in there.
No. Yeah, that's right. I understand. I promise you all, I really didn't know that when I gave a speech on the 6th of May 2015 about the need for reforming the financial services sector, I did not know, I had no reason to know where the hell it was going to go. But in the last roughly year and a half, things have started getting seriously dark. I'm absolutely with Richard Emery. I thought it was bad, but it's actually much worse than I thought it was. At one point, I thought the problem was like incompetence and poor incentives and a lack of transparency in costs and charges. Then I started thinking, this isn't just incompetence. This isn't just people, excuse my language, I don't need to swear. This isn't just people messing up badly. This is actually something far more sinister than that. And it then gets really worrying. And then you start saying to yourself, am I becoming some kind of conspiracy theorist? You know? And you end up going through this emotional roller coaster. Am I dreaming this? Are people really telling me this, that, and the other? And then you think about, you know, the news, you know, David Cameron, Green Seal. This is the, I don't want to say too much because I haven't got a cent to defend myself in court, but this is the kind of thing that, matters. Folks, it's been, I don't know how to describe it. It's been
Andy, do you mind if I just say one thing very briefly?
Please do.
Because of the delayed mortgage payments, I'm very concerned about the banks foreclosing on people and taking the homes off them.
Yeah, you're not the first person to mention this. We've got an event coming up all about that sort of stuff and the mortgage prisoners. We're just going to carry on doing what we can as best as we can. But I agree with Jess. We need to take our strategy to the next level, and we can do it if we find ways to work together. Does anybody have anything they're itching to say before we bring the session to a close?
Yeah, Nigel. No, Nigel.
Nigel, where are you? Oh,
yes,
Nigel
I'm
Perrin. Forgive me, Nigel.
Yeah.
I didn't see you.
Just,
okay, Nigel, thank you.
Hi, Andy. Just a suggestion.
Yeah.
It's something that I was involved in once before. Might the TTF consider having a meeting in one of the committee rooms in the Houses of Parliament, which I think is possible.
Yeah.
And we can all invite our own parliamentarians along to the meeting and try and get it in the eye of the press and the media.
I love that idea, Nigel. I've only known you for a few weeks, but you're a very, very clever man. I love the idea. Please do me a favour, send me a note all about that idea. One side of A4, we'll bring it to life. For some of you won't know, we've actually run 4 meetings at the House of Commons. The first was on 12th of September 2016, co-chaired with Tom Tugendhat. By the way, Tom Tugendhat, MBE MP, brilliant parliamentarian. He's the chair of the Treasury Select Committee. We ran an event in Parliament 12th of September 2016. It resulted in a whole load of stuff to do with transparency and costs and charges. And Tom Tugendhat is one of the 3 main names on a document called, bear with me, I'll find it. I'm surprised I'm so awake. The document is called Turning the Tide on Dirty Money. And this is actually a really interesting kind of branch of our conversation, because what he is saying and what many other people are saying is that there is massive abuse, really dirty money. Have a look at this document I just put in the chat. And we're planning to run an event about all that in due course. But Nigel, just to jump back to what you said, yes, indeed, brilliant idea. Please do send me a note about the idea, and we're working it together and bring it to life, and we can definitely try to do that. The idea of having people bringing their parliamentarians with them is super powerful. That's exactly what we need to do, Nigel. Good man. Yes, please. Progress it. Eva, did you want to say something?
No, it was me. Hi, Andy.
Yeah. Oh, I'm so sorry. Shida, lovely to see you. Please do share your thoughts. Thank you.
Yes, I'm supporting Nigel regarding the involving of a member of the parliament.
Yes.
I have had a lot of success in 1999 and 2008 when my case was raised in the parliament, and that has brought the media to be more active and more interested. And sooner we do it, it's better. I am in touch with my MP, and I'm trying to reserve the room in the committee just because of the COVID-19. I haven't been successful for last 1 year.
Yes. Yeah.
But I do support Nigel's idea, and sooner we do it, it's better.
Thank you very much indeed, Shada. Lovely to see you. You look very well. I'm pleased to tell you, you look very, very well indeed. Thanks, Shada. Does anybody else have anything itching they're keen to say before we look to bring the session to a close? Just wave a hand at me if you do. Okay, I guess it makes sense for me to start to bring this together. I think we've heard from people's heads tonight. I also think we've heard from people's hearts tonight. And I also think we've heard from somewhere even more important than that, from people's souls tonight. I don't really know where what I'm saying is coming from. That might sound a bit weird, but I feel like I'm just being guided. I'm on neutral right now, but it's just coming out of me. Let's kind of agree to do what we can together to make a difference. Let's understand the enemy, inverted commas, and what motivates our enemy. I think it was Roger talking very Sun Tzu earlier, the art of war. We do need to think about things in that way, I'm afraid. Not because we're combative or battle-minded, but because we have got a very, very strong and well-resourced foe, and we'll only have a chance of winning if we understand its weaknesses and our strengths, so we can keep it on its toes. And many of you are far more eloquent at talking about that kind of stuff than I am, including clearly people like Roger. Mark Bishop knows this topic really, really well. So we need to organise, we need to strategize, we need to mobilize. The only chance we've got in hell of doing anything successfully is if we work together. And on a very, very final note, I'm ever so pleased, I'm ever so pleased to share my screen, because oh my goodness me, oh my goodness me. Let me show you. Let me show you. Look. You all know where that figure was earlier on tonight, don't you? Yeah. You all know where that figure was earlier on tonight. Hopefully the guys have got some change in for the Starbucks around the corner from the High Court. Okay, we'll wrap it up there. Bless you all. Thank you very much indeed, and good night, good afternoon, good day, wherever you are, whatever you are. Let's just carry on thinking with our heart, talking with our soul, and using our brains. Thank you very much indeed. Thank you. I salute you all. Thank you very much. Thank you. Good night all. Good night. Good night all. Thanks to all the speakers. Thank you, everybody.